Chapter 4082. Get out of my way. Gong Jie pushed him aside and walked into the apartment like the man of the house. Hey! Before Hua Jin could stop him, Gong Jie had already walked into the bedroom. Hua Jin was even more dumbfounded. What was this? Was he trespassing? Yu held Natalia's hand and walked in. She looked around and asked in confusion, Uncle Hua Jin, are you still not up? Hua Jin rubbed his forehead helplessly and nodded weakly. It's my day off today, so I'm catching up on sleep. Catching up on sleep? Hua Jin said, I'm resting for 3 days. Is there something wrong? He lowered his head and saw the cute little girl beside Yu looking up at him. He couldn't help but think that this little girl was really beautiful. What was even more surprising was that this girl had purple eyes. He was shocked and squatted down to look at the girl's eyes. Natalia saw that Hua Jin kept staring at her. At first, she was not used to it and hid behind Yu. She was obviously a little timid. Hua Jin smiled at her. It's okay. Uncle isn't a bad person. For some reason, it seemed that Hua Jin's smile was naturally harmless and harmless. Natalia also realized that this handsome and beautiful man in front of her would definitely not harm her. Hence, she finally gathered her courage and stuck her head out. She blinked her beautiful purple eyes and looked at Hua Jin curiously. Hua Jin was a little surprised by her purple eyes. He thought to himself that such a young child wouldn't wear contact lenses. Moreover, her eyes didn't look like they belonged to someone who wore contact lenses. He was a little surprised. He had never seen someone who was born with purple eyes. Hence, he couldn't help but take a few more looks. Maybe she was born with different eyes. Hua Jin could also tell from Natalia's exquisite features that she was of mixed Eurasian descent. It was probably because she was of mixed blood that the color of her pupils was different from that of an ordinary Asian girl. Her name is Natalia. Natalia, what a nice name. Just as he was about to speak, Gong Jie's footsteps came from behind him and stopped beside him. Your house is so small? When Hua Jin heard this, he stood up unhappily and muttered, Don't you know how high the housing prices in the capital are? Such an apartment of more than 100 square meters, located in the downtown business district, was worth tens of millions. This man actually thought that this place was too small? Gong Jie sized him up casually before saying out of the blue, Put on your clothes. This time, Hua Jin was confused. More than an hour later, when Hua Jin realized that he was already at the sales office of a villa district, he looked at Yu and Natalia, who were sitting on his left, and then looked at Gong Jie, who was looking at the floor plan. The sales representative asked cautiously, May I know if you are paying in full or taking a loan? Gong Jie replied, Full payment. Hua Jin's mouth opened even wider. Could he do whatever he wanted just because he was rich? Full payment. This villa was worth more than 100 million because it came with its own furnishings. How could he say full payment so casually? Was this guy trying to sell him off? While Hua Jin was still in a daze, when it was time to sign the contract, the sales representative's eyes lit up. Chapter 4083. May I ask whose name is this house under? The Gong Jie turned around and asked Hua Jin, What's your name? Hua Jin, real name. Rong Jin, write it yourself. Oh, Hua Jin had just picked up the pen and signed his name on the contract under the guidance of the salesperson. He was even more confused now. He took a closer look and realized that he had signed the contract under the ownership of the villa. He was even more confused now. He couldn't understand what was going on. Yu saw Hua Jin's confused face and couldn't bear to see it anymore. Hence, when the Gong Jie went to swipe the card, she said to the confused Hua Jin, Uncle Hua Jin, Natalia is my uncle's adopted daughter. But as you know, his job is a little dangerous and he can't take her with him all the time. After thinking about it, you are the best candidate. Best candidate? Hua Jin looked at Natalia and the corners of his lips twitched. I'm a surrogate adoptive father? Yes. Yu hugged his arm and said coquettishly, Uncle Hua Jin, please take care of my Natalia. Hua Jin only felt that his mind was in a mess. He waved his hand and took a deep breath. He finally regained some of his composure. He took a deep breath, opened his eyes and forced himself to calm down. You mean, this child called Natalia was adopted by Gong Jie and he didn't have time to take care of her, so he asked me to take care of her? You nodded. Hua Jin frowned and sighed helplessly. I don't have any experience in taking care of children. She's not breastfeeding. She doesn't need you to feed her or coax her. Anyway, just take care of her like you would take care of me. When Hua Jin heard this, his brain still went blank. He still hadn't gotten used to the fact that he was about to step into the ranks of newbie stay-at-home dad. His empty eyes fell on Gong Jie. He swallowed and said tentatively, "But I usually have a lot of free time. I have to shoot a movie or something." Gong Jie suddenly fumbled in his arms and asked, "How much do you earn in a year?" Hua Jin pondered for a moment. This income is not always certain. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. 100 million? I can't get that much. Gong Jie raised his eyebrows. Without saying a word, he took out a stack of checkbooks and wrote something on it with a pen. Hua Jin leaned over to take a look. At that moment, Gong Jie had already signed his name and handed it to him. HSBC. You can withdraw the money directly. Gong Jie handed him a check. It was an empty check. Hua Jin was dumbfounded. You explained, you can withdraw as much as you want. Hua Jin swallowed again. This house was registered under his name, and there was even a check like this. I don't deserve this reward. Who said that I don't deserve this reward? Yu glanced at Natalia and said to Hua Jin, as long as you take good care of her, it'll be fine. As for work, as long as you're free, take on a few movies. If you're not free, take care of Natalia first. You don't have to worry about anything else. Uncle will pay the alimony. Wouldn't the alimony be too much? He didn't dare to take it. Chapter 4084. Keep it well. Gong Jie snorted. Hua Jin shivered in fear and put the check in his pocket. After collecting the receipt and contract for the house purchase, Hua Jin got into Gong Jie's car, only to see the latter instructing the chauffeur to drive them toward the furniture mall. Mei Kailong Furniture Mall. Yu brought Natalia to sit in the dessert section. Gong Jie led Hua Jin to the furniture section. Basically, he would pay for the furniture he chose. Hua Jin was speechless. As a celebrity, Hua Jin's income had always been very high. However, it was definitely not so high that he could easily spend 6 or 7 figures just to buy a piece of furniture. A set of kitchen cabinets cost 800,000, a sofa cost 200,000, and a coffee table cost 500,000. When he heard the prices, he was stunned. Wasn't this a little too scary? Originally, he thought that no matter how rich Gong Jie was, he would only be on par with Mu Yaja. Now, it seemed like that was not the case. Buying a villa was like buying a set of toys. As for the furniture, it was like playing house. It was as if the series of zeros on the price tags were just a series of numbers to him. When night came, the furniture was brought in and the electrical appliances were sent to the new home. Hua Jin stood in front of the villa again. It felt like a lifetime had passed. Just what had happened on this day? He still could not react. It was like a dream. Yu held Natalia's hand and walked into the villa. He announced happily, "Natalia, from now on, this is your new home." Natalia stood at the door in a daze. It took her quite a while to come back to her senses. Will I be living here from now on? Natalia's face was a little rosy. She suddenly ran to the sofa and sat down. The sofa was made of American leather and was very comfortable. Sitting on it, she felt like she was being wrapped up. She relaxed her furrowed brows and flashed a smile at Yu. I like this sofa. Yu walked over and opened his palm. Let's go. I'll show you your room. Natalia held Yu's hand and walked to her princess room. The entire villa was decorated in American style. The princess room had a romantic atmosphere like a fairy tale. The white wooden four-poster bed, the white bedside, the pink curtains, the light pink theme of the walls, and the beautiful lights. It was a warmth that she had never felt before. Do you like it? Natalia pursed her lips and nodded. I like it. You'll be staying in this room from now on. What about you? Me? This isn't my home. It's yours. Disappointment flashed across Natalia's eyes. You don't live here? Then who's going to live with me? She suddenly felt uneasy. Am I going to live alone? Of course not. 5 minutes later, Hua Jin squatted in front of Natalia. Yu Yu stood beside her and reminded her softly, from now on he's your guardian. You can call him brother. Wait, Hua Jin interrupted Yu Yu. How did she call you uncle? Daddy. Chapter 4085. Daddy? Hua Jin looked awkwardly at Gong Jie and then at Yu. He complained bitterly, then wouldn't there be a difference in seniority? When Yu Yu heard this, she felt that it made sense. She pondered for a while, but before she could say anything, Natalia suddenly said, Then I'll call you Mommy. Mommy? Hua Jin almost vomited blood. He clutched his chest in disbelief. How did this guy come up with such a nickname? When Yu Yu heard this, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She covered her mouth and laughed out loud. Ha! Mommy! Gong Jie's face was ashen. He should be angry, but he also felt helpless. More than anything, he was questioning Natalia's logic. Hua Jin immediately explained in all seriousness, You can't call me Mommy. I'm not a woman. Natalia tilted her head, then threw out a sentence that almost made Hua Jin kneel on the ground. You're not a woman? I thought you and Daddy were a couple. The painful blow was like an avalanche, covering Hua Jin's face. Hua Jin was so angry that his eyes were about to burst. What? You thought? This child actually thought that he was a woman. Hua Jin touched his face, feeling wronged. He admitted that he was a little more handsome, but a child shouldn't think that he was a woman, right? What was worse was that Natalia thought that he was a couple with Gong Jie. Hua Jin was so angry that he wanted to vomit blood. He had the urge to run out of the door. Natalia saw that Hua Jin's face was ashen. She was so scared that she hid behind Yu Yu and muttered softly, Did I say something wrong? Yu Yu held back her urge to laugh out loud. She waved her hand and quickly said, No. However, the one standing in front of you is a man, not a woman. Hua Jin muttered unhappily, The first thing I said when we met was that I was your uncle. Uncle? Uncle sounds good. Yu Yu snapped her fingers and said to Natalia, Why don't you call him uncle? When Hua Jin heard this, he also felt that it was not bad. And then call me uncle. Gong Jie nodded in agreement. He then said to Natalia, From now on, you will call him Uncle Hua Jin, okay? When Hua Jin heard this, he felt a chill run down his spine. It wasn't because of any other reason, but because he realized that when he spoke to Natalia, Gong Jie was unexpectedly gentle. Her voice was soft and gentle, as if she could drown someone. Luckily, he was facing Natalia. If it had been any other woman, his heart would have stopped beating. Even he couldn't help but feel his heart go numb for a moment when he heard this gentle voice. When Natalia heard this, she nodded. Suddenly, she thought of something and suddenly let go of Yu Yu's arm. She ran to Gong Jie's side and grabbed the corner of his shirt reluctantly. She looked confused and asked, Then? Daddy, where are you going? Gong Jie furrowed his brows. Even though he had gotten used to having a little girl who was not related to him by blood, calling him daddy over the past few days, it seemed that he had yet to fully accept the fact that he was a first-time father. After all, he had suddenly changed from a single man to a single daddy. Chapter 4086. However, his feelings for Natalia had improved a lot over the past few days. It was a little strange. Natalia was especially close to him. In order to get close to Natalia, Yu had tricked her with candy and coaxed her nicely. However, when it came to Gong Jie, Natalia liked him so much that she would stick to him whenever he stood there. Yu was also curious as to why Natalia liked Gong Jie so much. He had asked her about it before. The little girl said confidently, Because Daddy is tall and handsome, and he even gives me candy. Yu was not convinced and retorted, When I grow up, I will definitely be tall and handsome too. Also, I will give you candy too. But you are not my daddy. Natalia's words made Yu speechless. He pursed his lips and finally had nothing to say. All right. This was the charm of a mature man. Daddy, don't you live here? Natalia hugged Gong Jie's thigh, reluctant to part with him. Gong Jie bent down and easily carried her in his arms. He reached out and pinched the tip of her nose. Raising his eyebrows, he asked, Why? You can't bear for Daddy to leave? Natalia shook her head like a rattledrum. Don't go. I want to be with Daddy. Gong Jie frowned slightly. His lips curled into a helpless smile. I can stay here with you for a few days. However, Daddy has to go out to work after a while. When he is done, Daddy will come back. It won't be long. Really? Gong Jie carried her to Hua Jin's side and coaxed her gently. In the future, you will be with this uncle. You have to be obedient. It's okay if you don't. Daddy will video call you every day. If this uncle mistreats you, you can complain to Daddy and Daddy will beat him up. With just a few words, Natalia was so coaxed that she revealed her pearly white teeth. When Hua Jin heard this, he felt that it was unfair. What was this? Why would he mistreat a child for no reason? Moreover, he liked Natalia. Since Gong Jie had entrusted this child to him, he was not happy to see it happen. However, he could only accept it. However, there was one thing that he still had to confirm. Are you sure that you will compensate me for my absenteeism? Gong Jie glanced at him. I'm sure. Yu replied, Uncle even put his house under your name. This shows his sincerity. Hua Jin calmed himself down. Suddenly, a bad word popped up in his mind. Does this count as being a sugar baby? Alimony property? At that moment, Hua Jin felt like a good wife and mother who took care of the household chores and children. Was it too late for him to back out now? For some reason, a scene appeared in Hua Jin's mind. He was standing in front of the stove with Natalia on his back. He was wearing an apron and a scarf, and he was cooking porridge bitterly. OMG. He did not want to become like this. If this went on, he would definitely become a sallow man. Well, Hua Jin looked at Yu hesitantly. Yu saw through him immediately. But, are you going back on your word? Hua Jin replied vaguely, I'm not mentally prepared yet, am I? What mental preparation do you need? Chapter 4087. Gong Jie had been playing with Natalia. When he heard this, he turned around and said coldly, I will hire a nanny, bodyguard, and gardening for you. You just have to play with her and take care of her. Don't let her feel lonely. That's good enough. In other words, these tasks were Hua Jin's job. Accompany her to eat, drink, and play. Hua Jin was a little surprised. He didn't know what kind of special existence this child was for Gong Jie to treat her so seriously. Could it be Hua Jin looked at Yu meaningfully? When he looked at Natalia, his gaze was unusually gentle. Hua Jin couldn't help but shiver. Could it be this was Yu's future daughter-in-law? All right. Could it be that his main job was to raise Yu's daughter-in-law? At this thought, Hua Jin couldn't help but want to laugh. He held Yu's little hand and asked curiously, Do you like her? Yu didn't react at first and just nodded. Yes, of course. He liked Natalia a lot. When Hua Jin heard this, he gave him a meaningful look. Is it that kind of like? When Yu realized what Hua Jin's look meant, he immediately came to his senses and said, It's not that kind of like. Then what kind of like is it? Hua Jin lowered his voice and said, I thought your uncle was raising your future daughter-in-law for you. When he said this, Yu couldn't help but blush even more. That's not it. Don't talk nonsense, okay? After a pause, Yu explained, It's probably the kind of like you have for a younger sister. Liar. When I saw you looking at Yuao, that wasn't the way you looked at her. Although he doted on her a little, the gentleness in his eyes when he looked at Natalia was definitely not just limited to sibling love. However, Hua Jin was just teasing him. How old was Yu? How could such a young child understand the love and affection of the adult world? It was probably because he liked her, so he wanted to treat her well purely because he liked her. Hua Jin deliberately teased him, Don't worry, I'll definitely help you raise your wife well. But Yu started to threaten him. If you continue to spout nonsense, I'll get uncle to cripple you. Don't. Hua Jin clasped his hands together and begged for mercy. I was wrong, I know I was wrong. Hey, don't tell on me. Yu pulled Hua Jin to the side and whispered, Actually, my feelings for Natalia are pure. When I look at her, I feel like I'm looking at myself. But because, Yu said in a low voice, Actually, before this, She was adopted by a professor who specialized in the field of psychology and psychology. She was an orphan, but after the adoption, the professor used her as a test subject. Test subject? Hua Jin's expression turned solemn the moment he heard this term. It was inhumane. His mind immediately thought of examples such as human experiments and so on. How could it be so overboard? She was actually a normal child, but the professor wanted to study multiple personality disorder, so he cultivated a second personality in her. Hua Jin was smart and quickly understood what Yu meant by cultivating a second personality. Chapter 4088. Yu Yu's expression was solemn. To be precise, it's not a preparation. It's already created. Hua Jin was dumbfounded. Is it possible to create such a personality? He had always thought that dual personality was either influenced by the environment or born with it. He had never heard that it could be cultivated by humans. How could someone use such a young child to do such a messy experiment? In the past, he admired scientists because they had contributed a lot to mankind. But now, Hua Jin felt a chill run down his spine when he heard about it. It was too terrifying. Dual personality is an extremely painful thing. How could he do that? It's probably because the adopted child has no blood relatives. So, he doesn't know how to cherish her and is not fit to be Natalia's father. So, Hua Jin looked at Gong Jie and suddenly changed his view of Gong Jie. He got Natalia's custody? Uncle has already gotten Natalia's custody. But you know that with his work, Natalia can't be by his side all the time. Otherwise, it would be very dangerous. So, when necessary, he needs someone to take care of her. You're a good candidate. Why? Hua Jin pointed at himself and was a little surprised. I'm also very busy with work. Because Uncle Hua Jin is very gentle. Yu smiled. You're so gentle to me. You'll be gentle to Natalia too. I believe you'll be good to Natalia. Hua Jin couldn't help but feel warm inside when he heard that. He didn't expect Yu to have such an image of him. Don't worry, I'll take good care of her. Yu raised her hand and stuck out her little finger. Okay, that's a promise. Okay. Hua Jin walked in front of Natalia and squatted down so that he was at eye level with her. Natalia, can you call me Daddy in the future? Daddy? Natalia blinked her beautiful eyes. She looked at him and then at Gong Jie. Her long eyelashes fluttered like butterfly wings. Hua Jin's heart melted just looking at her. He couldn't help but think that it would be great if this little girl in front of him was really his biological daughter. But then again, if it was his daughter who looked like him, she would definitely be very beautiful. Daddy? Yes. Hua Jin squeezed her little hand. Don't call me uncle. How about calling me Daddy? Natalia laughed. I have two dads? When Hua Jin heard this, he was also stunned. How could he have forgotten that Natalia already had Gong Jie as her daddy? Can I call you Mommy? Natalia said out of the blue. Hua Jin was instantly stunned. He asked hesitantly, why? Because Natalia's next sentence left Hua Jin at a loss as to whether he should laugh or cry. Because you're prettier than a flower. Also, you don't look like a man. Ha! When Yu heard this, she couldn't help but burst into laughter. Chapter 4089. Hua Jin's face darkened completely. His fans acknowledged that he was prettier than flowers, so they gave him the nickname Hua Hua, which meant that he was prettier than flowers. But what did they mean by he didn't look like a man? Even a child was bullying him. Stop laughing! Hua Jin shouted angrily. Seeing that Yu was still laughing, he pushed his head lightly and said, I'm talking to you, don't laugh. I have to explain it properly so that you won't develop a gender identity disorder at such a young age. When Yu heard this, he stopped laughing and started to criticize Hua Jin seriously. Uncle Hua Jin, I feel that you were born with a gender identity disorder, so you can't blame her for this. You see, at least she knows that Uncle and I are men, but she mistook us for men. You really can't blame anyone else for this. When Hua Jin heard this, he raised both hands in surrender. He had already experienced Yu's sharp tongue. However, he still had to explain the matter seriously. Hua Jin turned around and said to Natalia seriously, I'm a man, not a woman. You can call me daddy, uncle, or brother, but you can't call me mommy, auntie, or sister. Do you understand? Looks like a man who has been hurt before, Yu added. Indeed, like auntie, sister, and the like. When Hua Jin wasn't famous yet, he would often hear these strange nicknames when he walked on the streets. Even when he became famous, he was still troubled by this. Many anti-fans and straight guys were jealous of him. He was obviously a man, but he looked like a woman. The anti-fans said that there were 2 female leads in his movies. Besides the real female lead, there was another female lead, which was the character that Hua Jin was playing. When Hua Jin first saw these comments, he was furious. He didn't understand where so many anti-fans came from, and he didn't know how many ghostwriters were involved. But later on, he gradually became numb to it. Later on, he seemed to have trained himself to be like an iron wall, and his heart wasn't as fragile as before. However, Hua Jin shook Yu. You can't say that I'm like a woman. Otherwise, I will definitely be very sad. Very sad. Very sad. Yu was shaken until he was dizzy. He immediately hugged Hua Jin's shoulders and said softly, Okay, I know. I won't joke with you anymore. Don't shake me anymore. Otherwise, I'll be broken. Gong Jie saw his nephew being shaken by Hua Jin like a puppet, but he turned a blind eye to it. Instead, he pulled Natalia in front of him and said gently, Daddy has work to do. You should follow this uncle and be good, okay? If he bullies you or mistreats you, tell Daddy. In the past few days, Gong Jie and Natalia's relationship had improved by leaps and bounds. In fact, Gong Jie hadn't wanted to adopt Natalia at all. To him, having another child was nothing more than having another burden. Moreover, she wasn't his biological child. He already had Yao, this little princess. Hence, no matter how beautiful and cute Natalia was, he was indifferent. However, for some reason, after the adoption process was completed, Gong Jie finally met Natalia formally under Alice's arrangement. Chapter 4090. He already had Yao, his little princess. Therefore, no matter how pretty and cute Natalia was, he would not be moved. However, for some reason, after the adoption process was completed, Gong Jie finally met Natalia formally under Alice's arrangement. To everyone's surprise, Natalia was especially close to the man the moment she saw him. Firstly, it was because Gong Jie was tall and handsome. Secondly, the man inexplicably gave her a warm sense of security and belonging. For an orphan like Natalia, what she lacked the most was a sense of security and belonging. This was because she did not have the concept of home since she was young. Moreover, from the orphanage to the Michelle Hospital, Natalia had never felt a sense of belonging. She did not know what a home was, but Gong Jie gave her this kind of warmth. She wanted to rely on this man. At that time, Yu and Alice were also there. When they saw Natalia taking the initiative to throw herself into Gong Jie's arms, they were extremely surprised. They had never thought that Natalia would be so close to anyone. Gong Jie was also very surprised. He had only seen Natalia once. Moreover, at that time in the office, Natalia's attention was all on Yu. Obviously, she did not notice him. To be precise, this was probably the first time they had met. He was also very surprised that Natalia, who was as cold as a cat in front of Yu, would take the initiative to throw herself into his arms. Could it be that this was predestined fate? However, Natalia's throwing herself into his arms did not make him feel repulsed at all. In fact, he enjoyed this kind of closeness. Gong Jie liked girls very much. He did not even think about getting married. However, he had thought about what his future daughter would look like. If she looked like him, then she would definitely look like Xianxia. She would have a pair of beautiful and charming peach blossom eyes. Her pupils were sparkling, as if there was a vast galaxy hidden in them. She would have a small but perky nose, and pink lips that were like cherry blossoms. Her skin was white and clean, without a trace of impurities. Everything was as beautiful as a crystal. He had never imagined what his future other half would be like, but he had already thought of what his daughter would look like. She must be as beautiful as Yao. However, he did not expect that he would adopt a daughter like Natalia. When she returned to the country, Natalia was afraid of strangers, but she was not afraid of him. She wasn't close to Yu or Alice, but she liked to cling to him. Especially at night, Natalia liked to hug him to sleep. At first, Gong Jie didn't know what to do. He didn't know why, but at first he felt that it was a little awkward for such a small girl to sleep so close to him. However, one day was fine, 2 days passed, and on the third day he seemed to have gotten used to the identity of father. What was there to be awkward about? Natalia was his daughter. Even though they were not related by blood, they still treated each other as their own. In fact, for Gong Jie, a sense of belonging and security was an extremely luxurious feeling. Even though he was born into a big family like the Gong family, it did not give him much sense of security. He had received military education from his father since he was young, and what was instilled in him was a cold concept. The warmth of a family was still in the memories of his mother and sister. Chapter 4091. This was also the reason why he was so reliant on Xianxia. No one could replace the warmth that Xianxia gave him. For some reason, Natalia felt close to him. In the beginning, she thought that such a man with such dazzling looks, handsome, tall, and strong arms would be able to carry her in his arms. Later, the usually cold Gong Jie showed her a rare smile. Natalia was so disappointed that she was mesmerized by this smile. He was too handsome. She fantasized about how good it would be if this man was her father, her family. However, her dream came true. Alice told her that the man in front of her was her daddy and her future family. Natalia liked him more and more. Most likely, the two of them were destined to have such a bond in their fates. Even Hua Jin was surprised that Gong Jie would be so patient with a child. When Natalia heard that Gong Jie was going to leave, she immediately felt reluctant. Frowning, she hugged his arm and said softly, "Don't go." Gong Jie could not help but be moved by her words. It was as if there were roots under his feet, trapping him. He really couldn't bear to leave. The girl in his arms was like cotton candy. Such a pitiful expression, grievance, and longing melted his heart. He actually had an inexplicable feeling for this child. Could this be the legendary fatherly love? Gong Jie had always thought that he was the kind of man who was born with a lack of fatherly feelings. For a man like him, it was hard to imagine what kind of husband and father he would be if he started a family in the future. He didn't expect. He actually had self-awareness as a father. Hua Jin also said, "Why don't you stay for a few days and keep her company? I'm not close to her. If you leave, I'll really be at my wit's end." Yu also said, "Uncle, why don't you stay for a few more days? There's no hurry to deal with hurricane." Gong Jie also nodded and agreed. "All right." He squeezed Natalia's soft hand and comforted her. "Daddy will stay for a few days, okay?" Natalia's smile widened. On the first day that Gong Jie stayed, Hua Jin realized a problem. It was true that he was rich. Sure, he could do whatever he wanted. Originally, he thought that even if the villa had been renovated and the furniture and appliances had been moved in, there would be no special smell after special treatment. However, it did not mean that there was no smell at all. Even though it had been ventilated for an entire afternoon, there was still a slight smell of paint. At night, although there was no obvious smell, Hua Jin still advocated not to move in for the time being. However, Gong Jie refused to comply. He complained that Hua Jin's place was as big as a fish tank. How could anyone live there? It was too cramped. Hua Jin was so angry that he almost vomited blood. Fish tank? It was a house of more than 100 square meters. How could it be a fish tank? It was too hurtful. As for Gong Jie, he immediately called the housekeeper and the cleaner. In a short while, the last bit of smell in the house dissipated. Yu also said that no matter how ventilated a new house was, if no one lived there, it would not have the smell of home. Chapter 4092. Hence, Hua Jin had no choice but to call for a moving company. Within a few hours, all the belongings in the apartment had been moved into the villa. That night, they moved into the villa. Hua Jin felt like he was in a dream. No one would have thought that he would move into the villa that he bought on the same day. This was too fast. Too fast. Too fast. At night, the salesperson came to prepare the final procedures for the handover of the villa. She had wanted to see if the owner of the villa had noticed any problems with the quality. In the end, she realized that the owner had already moved in. Was this a hotel? Did he move in with his luggage? The salesperson was experienced and knowledgeable, but she was still shocked. She had never seen such a generous buyer. Although there were many rich big bosses in Beijing, no matter how generous they were, buying a house would require a few days of planning. It was not a one-time deal. In the end, this customer was good. A few 100 million yuan was easily spent. The house was handed over before noon, and when she came to take a look at it at night, the furniture and appliances were all ready. Did he have to be so scary? Moreover, the owner was so young and so handsome, hence, the salesperson tried to find out from Yu who Gong Jie was to him. In the end, Yu said casually, "Gong Jie is my uncle. Auntie, he already has a girlfriend." Just as she was wondering who this handsome and rich man's girlfriend was, she watched as Hua Jin walked out in a bathrobe. She was even more dumbfounded. Originally, when she was at the sales office, she was a little curious. She had suspected the identity of Gong Jie and Hua Jin. Because Gong Jie had bought the house with his credit card, the house was registered under Hua Jin's name. She knew who Hua Jin was. He was a big celebrity. Many big celebrities came here to buy houses. It was not the first time she had seen a big celebrity buying a house. There were even many big bosses who bought villas for their mistresses. It wasn't like there weren't any, however. The relationship between this Gong Jie and Hua Jin made her a little confused. In the end, as soon as she entered, she saw Hua Jin in a bathrobe. For a moment, he could not help but let his imagination run wild. Could it be that between the two of them, was it that kind of relationship? This man's partner was Hua Jin, who was rumored to be gay. Could it be that they were also kept as mistresses? The salesperson felt that he was in a bad mood. Why were all handsome men in pairs? Finally, after completing the procedures to hand over the room, the salesperson left with a gloomy face, clutching his heart. Gong Jie walked over with Natalia in his arms. Seeing Hua Jin in a bathrobe, he cleared his throat and said sternly, "Please don't show your chest in front of Natalia." Hua Jin was dumbstruck. He reacted and immediately retorted, "What do you mean by exposing my breasts? I'm well covered. Your chest is exposed." Gong Jie looked righteous. Unsightly. Hua Jin was speechless. He was so angry that he gritted his teeth, but he told himself not to stoop to the level of such people. Hence, he went back to his room with an ashen face. It was not until he changed into his pajamas that Gong Jie looked better. Yu covered her mouth and snickered at the side. Hua Jin felt very aggrieved. Did he lose his basic personal freedom just to take care of a child for him? Chapter 4093. Yu looked at Hua Jin and then at Gong Jie and muttered to herself, "What a pair of clowns." Especially when she saw Hua Jin's steely expression, Yu's heart ached for him for a few seconds. At night, Natalia was still pestering Gong Jie to sleep with her. Initially, Gong Jie wanted Hua Jin to coax Natalia to sleep. However, Natalia was a little picky about the bed and the person. She only recognized Gong Jie and not Hua Jin. Hua Jin had no choice but to find Gong Jie's room awkwardly. He braced himself and knocked on the door. Gong Jie happened to be awake. When he opened the door and saw him, he was a little surprised. "What's wrong?" "Natalia misses you." Hua Jin sighed and said helplessly, "This child doesn't really recognize me. She only recognizes you. Well, without you she can't sleep peacefully." Gong Jie was stunned for a long time. He said helplessly, "If you can't handle her, what will happen to you and her after I leave? I'll have to take one step at a time. There's nothing I can do." Gong Jie couldn't help but laugh. He walked to Hua Jin's room. The wall lamp was on. When Natalia heard Gong Jie's footsteps, she immediately sat up on the bed. When she saw him, she smiled. "Daddy." She opened her arms to Gong Jie. Gong Jie walked slowly to the bedside and sat down on his side. However, he didn't respond to her hug immediately. Natalia was very surprised. She tilted her head and looked at him in confusion. She didn't understand why he didn't respond. Gong Jie asked in a low voice, "Why aren't you sleeping?" This was the first time Natalia saw Gong Jie so serious. For a moment, she felt inexplicably guilty. Actually, she did sleep well. However, The bed was too unfamiliar. Moreover, she was not used to Hua Jin. After all, it was the first time they met. She tossed and turned on the bed, unable to fall asleep. Natalia stammered, "I can't sleep. Recognizable bed?" Natalia nodded fervently. "I really tried to sleep, but the bed was too soft. I couldn't fall asleep." The mattress under her was the best zero-pressure mattress on the market bought by the Gongjia. It was not soft, but at least it was more comfortable than the hard iron beds in the hospital. Natalia had been sleeping on a metal bed all this time, so she couldn't get used to the soft and comfortable mattress all of a sudden. "Close your eyes and don't let your imagination run wild. You'll fall asleep soon, okay?" Gongjia comforted her gently. Nibbling on her lower lip, Natalia nodded with a frown on her face. However, when she lay down and her brother was about to tuck her in, he suddenly heard a choked sob coming from the woman. He was shocked and immediately leaned over. The sobbing sound became clearer. Hua Jin heard it too and reminded him softly, "Is she crying?" Gongjia frowned. "This girl couldn't be that weak, right?" Hua Jin frowned and said with a headache, "It's her first time in such a foreign country. Maybe she hasn't gotten over the jet lag yet. Moreover, she's in a foreign bed with a foreign person. She'll naturally feel unfamiliar and scared. Why don't you keep her company tonight? I'll sleep in your room." With that, Hua Jin tried to find an excuse to escape. Gongjia shouted in a low voice, "You're not allowed to leave." Hua Jin's footsteps were forcefully stopped. Chapter 4094. Hua Jin stopped in his tracks. "Sit over here." Gongjia ordered again. Hua Jin had no choice but to move back to the bed stiffly like a robot. "Lie down." Hua Jin lay down with a straight back. "Hug her." Just as Hua Jin was about to retort, he vaguely felt a sharp gaze sweeping over him in the dim light. Frightened, he immediately opened his arms and pulled Natalia into his embrace. A certain great demon king was finally satisfied. He whispered into Natalia's ear, "Daddy will sing for you, okay?" Natalia smiled in surprise. When Hua Jin heard that Gongjia wanted to sing, he was shocked. Oh my god. If Gongjia wanted to sing, wouldn't that be wailing like ghosts and howling like wolves? He vaguely remembered that you didn't seem to have any talent in singing. If that was the case, Gongjia's uncle probably didn't have good musical genes either. Just as he was making wild guesses, Gongjia opened his thin lips slightly and sang in a deep, magnetic voice. Outside the window, the raindrops, dong dong ding ding, falling into my heart, freezing into ice, memories of the past, two people in a room, roses and champagne. When you leave, I can only embrace the cold air. When Gongjia's deep voice came out of his thin lips, Hua Jin was stunned when he heard it. Perhaps he didn't have high expectations for Gongjia. He had always thought that Gongjia would be tone-deaf like Yu. However, he had forgotten that Yu's tone-deafness must have been inherited from Mu Yaja. He recalled that Gongjia's mother was Mu Qingqing. Mu Qingqing's voice had once shocked the entire capital. With such a singing mother, Yun Shishir's singing was also very good. And how could Gongjia's voice be bad? Good, his voice was even louder than Gu Xing's. In the world of singers, Gu Xing's voice was the only one that the general public recognized. His singing was soulful, magnetic, and had a penetrating power. This penetrating power did not refer to his voice, but it had a power that could penetrate one's heart. It's easy to infect everyone. To be fair, Gu Xing's singing skills were definitely not the best. However, his voice was the most contagious of all. Gongjia was better than him. So much so that Hua Jin even had the urge to cry when he heard this song. Memories of you. Too many to count softly, softly lonely sings to me I'll never forget. Evidence of your presence. How else am I going to prove it? Waiting for the dawn together even if I lose you, I'm gonna love you too. Even if the whole world is dying I gave myself an ending. Gongjia rarely sang. He did not like to listen to music and rarely sang. In the past, when Yun Shishir pestered him to sing, he was too shy to say it. However, when it came to Natalia, he was able to throw away all his burdens naturally. After singing 2 songs, Gongjia heard Hua Jin's steady breathing and knew that he had fallen asleep. Natalia's eyelids gradually became heavy and she was about to fall asleep. Just as he stood up and was about to leave, a soft little hand grabbed onto him. Gong Jie turned around and saw Natalia holding his hand. Her voice was hoarse as she said, "Don't go." Her soft voice carried a hint of reluctance. "Stay with me. Otherwise, I won't be able to sleep, okay?" Chapter 4095. He sat down and caressed her forehead gently. "Good girl. You should sleep now. I want you to keep me company." Natalia's coquettish tone was irresistible to him. Feeling helpless, he lay down next to her and adjusted the quilt for her. Then, he gently rubbed the tip of his nose against her forehead. "Sleep. Good night." Natalia's lips curled into a smile. Her eyelids gradually closed, and she soon fell asleep. Before nightfall, Yi was sent back to the Mu family. When he told Xianxia that Gong Jie had adopted a daughter, Xianxia was so shocked that her eyes almost popped out of their sockets. How was that possible? Her brother was known for being a cold-hearted person. How could he adopt a daughter out of kindness? She couldn't wait to meet the girl who made her brother break his rules. She wanted to see what kind of girl she was. Yu had the keys to the villa. There were a total of 3 keys. One for Hua Jin, one for Gong Jie, and one for him. However, the next day, when Xianxia opened the door of the villa and appeared at the bedroom door with Yu, she saw the 3 of them hugging each other as they slept. She didn't feel good at all. When Yu saw his mother standing rooted to the ground in a daze, he, too, poked his head in curiously. However, when he saw Gong Jie hugging Natalia while the latter hugged Hua Jin to sleep, he was so shocked that he sucked in a breath of cold air. Hem. Yu cleared his throat solemnly. Gong Jie was a light sleeper. When he heard the commotion, he opened his eyes abruptly and looked in the direction of the sound. He saw Xianxia and Yu standing at the door. He was slightly shocked and immediately sat up on the bed. He ran his fingers through his messy hair and followed Xianxia's gaze to the side. Oh, he remembered now. Last night, the 3 of them seemed to have slept together. However, wasn't it normal for men to sleep together? Why was his sister looking at him with such a meaningful gaze? Gong Jie's lips twitched. Could she have misunderstood something? However, Xianxia didn't say it out loud. If she didn't say it out loud, he wouldn't even have a chance to explain himself. If he tried to force an explanation, it would only make things worse. It would only make things worse. However, the way she looked at him seemed to be saying, "I know, you don't have to explain." Gong Jie felt even more frustrated. He stretched out his long leg and immediately kicked Hua Jin awake. Hua Jin also woke up at once. He sat up abruptly. When he saw Xianxia, he thought that he was dreaming. He giggled a few times. When he turned his head, he saw that Gong Jie was also there. He immediately couldn't wake up anymore. Why was he sleeping in this room? Hua Jin thought about it carefully and finally remembered. He remembered. Yesterday, Gong Jie had sung for Natalia. In the end, he had fallen asleep while listening. It had been a very peaceful night. He didn't have any dreams. He didn't know what happened after that. Looking at the situation, could it be that Gong Jie had also stayed in this room last night? That must be it. Natalia must have been reluctant to let him go and pestered him to stay. When he saw the strange look in Xianxia's eyes, Hua Jin's eyelids twitched even more violently. He had also been reduced to the same awkward situation as Gong Jie. He also felt that Xianxia had obviously misunderstood something. However, since she didn't say it out loud, he couldn't explain it either. What should he do? He couldn't let her misunderstand. Chapter 4096. Why are you sleeping here? Hua Jin paused and suddenly slapped his head. Ah. He immediately pretended to be calm and said, I remember now. Yesterday, Natalia couldn't sleep and wanted to pester you. You sang for her, and then I fell asleep while listening. But why are you sleeping here too? Didn't you ask me to develop a relationship with Natalia? Gong Jie knew very well that Hua Jin was deliberately saying this to explain to Xianxia so that she wouldn't let her imagination run wild. Thus, he played along and said, she didn't want me to leave, so I lay down. I was sleepy too, so I didn't think too much about it. Why, do you mind? Don't mind. No wonder you slept so tightly the whole night. Hua Jin quickly said, But what was the name of the song you sang yesterday? It was so good. I'll download it and listen to it. Upon hearing this, Gong Jie asked in a low voice, Did I sing? Yun Shishir's attention was immediately diverted. Xiao Jie, did you sing? Her astonished look surprised Hua Jin even more. From what you're saying, he never sang before. Yun Shishir nodded. Xiao Jie doesn't like to listen to music, so he doesn't like to sing either. But I think his singing should be very good. Gong Jie's face turned green from embarrassment. No way. How can that be? I just think it's very good. Hua Jin said to Yun Shishir, when I heard him sing yesterday, it was really amazing. But I've never heard that song before. Is it an old song? Gong Jie ignored him. This song was actually composed by him when he was bored. Because he didn't like to sing, but that day, when he was sitting by the beach, a melody suddenly appeared in his mind for some reason. The lyrics were also born naturally along with the melody. There was no one around, so he sang it himself. As he sang it, he remembered it deeply. To be more precise, the melody and lyrics were all randomly hummed by him. When Hua Jin heard this song, he was a little surprised at first. She was surprised by his charming voice and even more surprised that he had never heard such a beautiful song before. Logically speaking, with such a high standard of arrangement, it should be an instant hit. Why had he never heard of it before? Hua Jin didn't know that the Gong Jie was humming to himself. If he knew, he would be shocked. Natalia was woken up by the voices of a few people. Coincidentally, she had slept enough. She opened her eyes and blinked. Gong Jie realized that she was awake and gently pinched her cheek. You're awake? Like a kitten, Natalia snuggled into his arms and hugged his waist. Daddy? Gong Jie too reached out to hug her and gently caressed her silky hair. Such an intimate snuggle made you feel very uncomfortable. Why was she so clingy to Gong Jie but not willing to play with him? He didn't know what this uncle of his was capable of. Could it be that he had secretly fed Natalia some kind of bewitching potion? Gong Jie suddenly realized that Yu was staring at him with an inexplicable hatred. When Hua Jin saw this, he couldn't help but want to laugh. This uncle and niece pair was really too cute. This was the first time he had seen Yu jealous. Chapter 4097. Yun Shishir noticed it too and held back her laughter. She had never seen Yu get jealous before, so she found it very novel. It wasn't that Yu had never been jealous before, but it was only towards her. Other than her, she had never seen Yu get jealous of anyone. Yun Shishir also looked at Natalia seriously. No matter who it was, they would still be deeply attracted by her mesmerizing purple eyes at first glance. She was very surprised. In this world, people with a pair of purple pupils were extremely rare. There were many people who were born with different eyes, but pure purple eyes were extremely rare. She remembered that in the era of black and white photos, there was a European and American actress called Elizabeth Taylor who had a pair of purple eyes. That pair of eyes could be said to be a rare treasure of that era. However, there was still controversy about her purple eyes. Some people said that her eyes weren't pure purple, but that it was just an illusion under the refraction of light. But now, the beauty had passed away, and the photos that remained were all black and white. There was no way to verify it at all. However, the eyes of the girl in front of him were truly purple. She was too beautiful. Yun Shishir couldn't help but sigh inwardly. No wonder he was her son. His taste was extraordinary. Aside from her purple eyes, this girl's facial features were very delicate and cute. Yun Shishir picked up Yu and said comfortingly, "Let's wait outside, okay? Natalia wants to change her clothes." But Yu nodded like a gentleman. Yun Shishir had just carried Yu out when Gong Jie stood up and said to Hua Jin, "Help her change. I'll wait outside." With that, Gong Jie ignored Hua Jin's pleading gaze and left the room. Hua Jin and Natalia stared at each other in bewilderment. This time, they had packed a lot of Natalia's clothes. Many of them were new clothes that Gong Jie had bought for her. Natalia could not help feeling disappointed as she watched her man leave. Hua Jin saw this and gently patted her head. He smiled and said, "I'll help you put on your clothes, okay?" Natalia pouted. "I can wear it myself." "Eh? You can wear it yourself?" "Okay, With that, Natalia walked to the wardrobe and picked up a dress. She seemed to like dresses. However, it was normal for girls to like dresses. Hua Jin sat quietly at the side, but he intentionally looked away. Although Natalia was still a young girl who had yet to develop, he still wanted to avoid her. From the corner of his eye, he saw her unbuttoning her nightgown. Relieved to see that she was dressed properly, he stood up and said, "I'll wait for you outside." Natalia was a little surprised and nodded blankly. Although she was young, she understood the difference between men and women. Although she was still young, Hua Jin respected her as a woman. This gentlemanly attitude warmed Natalia's heart. In fact, she had long understood the difference between men and women. She also knew that there were some things that she should avoid. However, in the hospital, Professor Romanka didn't seem to mind at all. This made her feel disgusted. However, seeing how Hua Jin adhered to his principles, Natalia felt warm in her heart. Chapter 4098. Her impression of him had also improved. When Hua Jin walked out of the room, Gong Jie had just finished changing his clothes. When he saw him walk out, he looked displeased. "Aren't you going to help her change her clothes?" Hua Jin frowned and seemed to be in a difficult position. She's a girl. Although she's still young, it's better to teach her that there's a difference between men and women from a young age. It's not appropriate for a man like me to do that, right? When Gong Jie heard this, he immediately realized this problem and looked at Hua Jin in a new light. "I didn't expect you to be so principled." Hua Jin snorted. "Of course. Do you think that everyone is as stupid as you?" When Gong Jie heard this, his expression changed. "What did you say?" "Nothing." He quickly turned his head and mumbled softly, obviously terrified. Yun Shirshir, who was trying to hold back her laughter, suddenly said, "Does she know how to put on her own clothes? She's so young. Why don't I go in and help her?" Hua Jin said, "She knows how to put on her own clothes. Besides, even if she doesn't know how, let her figure it out herself. Independence is something that needs to be trained from a young age." Yun Shirshir nodded and asked again, "What's going on with this child?" Gong Jie said, "Didn't you mention it to you?" "He mentioned it to me." Yun Shirshir lowered her voice and asked, "She has dual personality disorder too? Really?" "Yeah. I can't tell." Gong Jie raised his eyebrows and laughed. "Does you have dual personality disorder?" "You can't tell either, right?" After he said this, Yun Shirshir couldn't help but be enlightened. "But why did you adopt her?" Yun Shirshir paused and said, "My Xiao Jie didn't like children in the past, right?" When Gong Jie heard this, he did not say anything. He only looked at Yu meaningfully. Yun Shirshir followed his gaze and looked at her son. She understood half of what he meant. Could it be that this guy had his first awakening of love so early? Yun Shirshir was a little confused. Hua Jin let out a long sigh. "He's her guardian, so I'm her surrogate guardian." Yun Shirshir was a little confused. "What do you mean?" Hua Jin didn't dare to say anything. He just looked at Gong Jie with a helpless and meaningful gaze. Yun Shirshir, on the other hand, was baffled. However, after a short while, she understood. Most likely, Gong Jie had entrusted Natalia to Hua Jin. After all, Gong Jie's job required him to fly around the world for many years. It was so dangerous, so it was definitely inconvenient for him to keep Natalia by his side all the time. Therefore, it was only natural that Natalia would be handed over to Hua Jin to raise. However, according to Yu, Gong Jie had specially bought a villa and registered it under Hua Jin's name. He also gave him a blank check as alimony. It had to be said that little Jie was very generous with his money. It seemed that he liked Natalia a lot. Otherwise, he wouldn't have put in so much effort. However, Hua Jin was a little hesitant. What if Natalia and I are not close after Gong Jie leaves? What should I do then? Yun Shirshir said, "You have to cultivate your relationship with her. Relationships are cultivated." "How do I cultivate?" In this aspect, Hua Jin was obviously at a loss. "I don't have any experience in this area. It's very simple. For example, Chapter 4099. Natalia had just changed her clothes and was about to leave when she saw Gong Jie, Xianxia, and Hua Jin standing outside the door, along with the four Yu. All of them had charming smiles on their faces. The four of them asked almost simultaneously, "Are we going to the amusement park?" Natalia was stunned for a moment. She was a little confused. What's amusement park? He realized that the woman might not understand what an amusement park was in Chinese, so he explained it in English. It's called amusement park. Amusement park. Natalia immediately realized that the amusement park was the legendary place where there were balloons, amusement rides, and many cartoon characters. For a moment, her eyes were filled with longing. But her eyes were immediately filled with excitement. When Natalia smiled, she was especially charming. Her violet eyes made him feel as if there was endless tenderness in his heart that could not be contained and was about to overflow. Gongjie could not help but walk over. Just as he was about to reach out and hug her, Xianxia stopped him at the right time. Don't forget that today's trip to the amusement park is to let Hua Jin and Natalia cultivate their relationship. When Gongjie heard that, he could not help but look disappointed. They had indeed discussed it earlier. After all, Hua Jin was Natalia's real guardian. Natalia had to spend most of her time with him. However, now that Natalia liked to stick to Gongjie and not Hua Jin, Xianxia and Yu thought of using the amusement park's parent-child trip to cultivate their father-daughter relationship. This was also something that had been agreed upon with Hua Jin. Hua Jin had also vowed that he wanted to use the trip to the amusement park to cultivate his relationship with Natalia. Gongjie had also promised that he would do his best to create an opportunity for the two of them to live together harmoniously. He absolutely could not destroy it. Therefore, he suppressed the urge to hug Natalia and allowed Hua Jin to walk over. He squatted down in front of Natalia and said gently, "Uncle will hug you, okay?" Natalia glanced at Gongjie with a hint of longing in her eyes. When Gongjie saw this, he pretended to be indifferent. He walked in front of Yu and gently picked up Yu. Natalia was a little disappointed to see him hug Yu first. Hua Jin tried to reach out his hand again. "Daddy, can you hug me?" Natalia looked at him again and finally nodded in agreement. "All right." She opened her arms and hugged Hua Jin's shoulders, snuggling into his embrace. Hua Jin carried Natalia in his arms, and the group decided to set off. Their destination was still Fairy Tale Valley, which was built by Leji Group. However, after 2 years of settling down and with the completion of the new phase of the project, Fairy Tale Valley had become one of the top theme parks. Other than having more rides, the theme had also been perfected. Fairy Tale Valley was developing a series of themed animated films. They wanted to use Fairy Tale Valley as the backdrop to make a series of fairy tale movies. Fairy Tale Valley's share of the profits for the new quarter was very significant. This also proved that Yu's eye for talent was second to none. Li Hanlin's methods and ambitions were obvious to everyone. His goal was to turn Fairy Tale Valley into a world-class fairy tale theme park. Chapter 4100. The villa was not too far away from the theme park. When they set off, the traffic was not very congested. Hence, they arrived at Fairy Tale Valley in less than half an hour. With Li Hanlin's meticulous arrangements, the 5 of them managed to get VIP passes. With this card, it meant that he could play all the games without having to queue up. When they entered the entrance, Natalia was deeply attracted by the themed statue placed at the entrance of Fairy Tale Valley. The themed statue of Fairy Tale Valley was a rainbow unicorn. This was designed by Yu. The unicorn had snow-white manes, black eyes, a golden horn, and a rainbow ponytail. It was so cute and charming that it had become one of the most popular cartoon characters in the world. The rainbow unicorn created by Leji Holdings had even become the favorite toy of children all over the world. As Leji Holdings' signature mascot, the sales of this toy accounted for a considerable portion of the company's sales. Many people might not know where this toy came from, but they had definitely seen it before. It was obvious that the design of this toy was a success. What a beautiful unicorn! Natalia ran over with a smile. It was obvious that she loved unicorns. Seeing that his mother really liked the rainbow unicorn, Yu's vanity swelled immeasurably in an instant. She likes the rainbow pony. Xianxia glanced at him coldly. It was as if she saw her son's proud tail. Are you very proud? Gong Jie did not hesitate to pour cold water on him. What's so great about being able to draw? Unlike some people who only know how to make sarcastic remarks, Gong Jie was speechless. Hua Jin held Natalia's hand and walked to the front of the statue. When he saw that she liked it so much, he could not help but feel happy too. Sometimes he really envied her. The younger the child, the easier it was to be satisfied. Often, a lollipop or a toy could be satisfied easily. When you were with your child, you would feel that happiness were actually that simple. Hua Jin's mood could not help but lighten up a little. He lowered his head and held up his phone. Do you want me to take a photo of you? Sure. Natalia pointed at the rainbow pony. I want to take a picture with the rainbow pony. All right. Hua Jin was secretly glad that he was smart enough to bring a selfie stick. He placed his phone on the selfie stick and was about to walk to Natalia's side. Natalia pushed him away in disdain. I want to take a picture with rainbow pony alone. Hua Jin, he pouted and said, can't we take a picture together? I want to take a picture with rainbow pony alone. Natalia's attitude was firm, and Hua Jin couldn't say anything more. So, he brought her to her spot and raised his phone. Smile. Natalia was very cooperative, showing her white teeth. Hua Jin gave her 10 consecutive shots. People with good looks would look good even if it was just a snap of them. As Hua Jin continued to take pictures, he became addicted. He took more than 20 pictures in a row. Natalia's posture as she hugged Rainbow Pony stiffened. Are you done? Seeing that Hua Jin was still taking pictures, Natalia thought that it was because the pictures were not good enough. Chapter 4101. When Hua Jin stood up, Gong Jie immediately snatched the phone from his hand and flipped through the photo album one by one. Swiping his finger across the photos, Natalia's bright smile seemed to make the sun even brighter. Hua Jin was pleased with himself. How's my technique? Gong Jie did not look at him but continued to admire the photos. He couldn't help but smile and finally spit out 2 words, not bad. Can you give me a higher rating? When Gong Jie heard Hua Jin's complaint, he looked at him calmly. But if I give you a higher rating, you'll get a bonus? Hua Jin was silent. Natalia tilted her head and looked at Hua Jin, then at Gong Jie. She asked softly, do you want to take a photo with me? Hua Jin immediately waved at her like a little fangirl. Wait for me. He snatched the phone from Gong Jie and was about to run over when Gong Jie grabbed him by the collar and pulled him back. What are you doing? Stand here. Hua Jin was speechless. Gong Jie glared at him. Stand still. Hua Jin instinctively stood up straight, but he didn't know why he wanted him to stand still. Gong Jie walked to Natalia's side and picked her up. Then he said, take the photos. Hua Jin felt humiliated. So he was treating him like a personal photographer. He had the urge to smash the phone on the ground. Did he really think he had no temper? Gong Jie, this rascal, he would show him what he was made of. Come, give me a smile. Hua Jin raised his phone and kept taking photos of Gong Jie and Natalia. Lean your head on your shoulders a little more. Yes, very good. His eagerness made him look like a bumpkin. When Yu saw this, her eyes were filled with disdain. Just a moment ago, he had seen him clenching his fists tightly as though he was about to explode. Who would have thought that he would still be so cowardly? A cowardly flower. When the Gong Jie was done, Hua Jin wanted to walk over and take a selfie with Natalia. However, Yu had already walked over and put her arm around Natalia's shoulder. She smiled and said, take a selfie for us too. As she spoke, she leaned her head against Natalia's head affectionately. Hua Jin said, do you think you're taking a wedding certificate? Yu said, go ahead. Hua Jin, such an arrogant tone despite his young age. Hua Jin suppressed his indignation and took a few more selfies for Yu and Natalia. When it was finally his turn, Natalia refused to take a selfie. She was attracted by the hot air balloon in the distance. Natalia pointed at the hot air balloon and said, is that a hot air balloon? Gong Jie nodded. Yeah. I want to play. But the group of people were like stars surrounding the moon as they walked away with Natalia. Hua Jin stood alone in the wind and was stunned for a while. He felt so wronged. He came back to his senses and chased after them. He asked and found out that a hot air balloon could only seat 3 people at most. Gong Jie and Yu Yu immediately stuck close to Natalia. It was obvious that the 2 of them wanted to sit with her. Yun Shirshir couldn't take it anymore. She cleared her throat and said, "Don't forget why you're here." Chapter 4102. Yun Shirshir glared at Yu Yu again. Yu Yu was silent. Alright. He would give in. Yu Yu stood aside dejectedly. Yun Shirshir said to Hua Jin, "The 3 of you can sit together." Hua Jin got his wish and boarded the same hot air balloon as Natalia. However, the space in the hot air balloon was very small. With the 3 of them sitting together, the space was already very cramped. Hence, the 3 of them were very close to each other. Hua Jin felt that his face was almost pressed against Gong Jie's back. He looked up with some resentment. Was this guy so tall? Oh, he had forgotten that Gong Jie was almost 1.9 meters tall. However, was the difference of 10 centimeters that big? In the past, when he stood further away, he could not feel it. Now that he was closer, he realized that the difference was so obvious. This height difference made him feel very hurt. It was Natalia's first time in a hot air balloon. Hence, she was a little nervous. She tugged at Hua Jin's clothes tightly. As the hot air balloon slowly rose, she grabbed his collar even more anxiously. How does this hot air balloon fly? Hua Jin was stumped by the question. Children of Natalia's age were especially curious. That one question was enough to make him stumble. It was not that he did not understand, but it would be too difficult to explain. Hua Jin also understood the principle of using hot air to lift the balloon. The upper half of the balloon was a large balloon and the lower half was a hanging basket. The inside of the balloon heated the air and used it as buoyancy to lift the entire balloon. However, with such a complicated principle, if he really explained it to her, not only would she not understand, she might even ask worriedly, "Will this hot air balloon fall?" He looked at Gong Jie for help. Natalia saw that Hua Jin was looking at Gong Jie. She also looked at Gong Jie in confusion. However, she saw someone say faintly, "By magic." Hua Jin was stunned. How could Natalia believe such a perfunctory answer? Magic? Natalia's eyes lit up. Really? Yep. Oh my god. The world really has magic. It's so interesting. Hua Jin's English was average, but he could barely understand. Gong Jie coaxed her, saying that the hot air balloon could fly because of magic. It was magic that made such a big balloon fly. What surprised him the most was that Natalia actually knew. Believe. It turns out that children are so easy to coax, but is it really okay to say that? Would it create a misunderstanding for her? While Hua Jin was still hesitating, Natalia turned her head to look at him and asked expectantly, "Do you want to do it? You have a magic?" No, sorry. As soon as Hua Jin finished speaking, Natalia's face could not help but show a trace of disappointment. When Gong Jie saw this, he gently held Natalia's little face and winked at her gently. "Natalia, you're a magician." Me? Yep. Gong Jie gently pinched the tip of her nose. Yes, you. But Natalia was a little hesitant and cautiously reminded him, "I don't know magic, why not?" Gong Jie gently kissed her forehead. "When you smile, the whole world becomes beautiful. Isn't that the best magic in the world?" As soon as he finished speaking, Natalia understood what he meant. Her eyes widened in surprise, and the boy revealed a charming smile. Really? Chapter 4103. When you smile, everyone will be in a good mood. Therefore, your smile is the greatest magic. Hearing that, Natalia smiled at Gong Jie. Then, she turned around and smiled at Hua Jin. Hua Jin was stunned for a moment. Very quickly, he was infected by her bright smile and couldn't help but smile too. When Natalia saw that Hua Jin was really smiling, she was instantly inspired. It happened. When I laughed, you laughed, and he laughed too. I really know magic. Gong Jie patted her head in relief. Then he glanced meaningfully at Hua Jin. Hua Jin immediately squatted down and said with a smile, "Natalia's magic is amazing." In fact, he was marveling inwardly. Gong Jie was the one who had not shown his true colors. He didn't know that he was so good at coaxing children. So, it could be said that way? Hua Jin felt that his EQ had been crushed. But he had to admit that if magic really existed in this world, Natalia would definitely be the best magician. Because just looking at her smile made him feel like he had been healed. In fact, coaxing a child really doesn't need to be rigid. A child's childhood needs romantic fairy tales. It might as well create a fairy tale world for her. Those ideas and rules that only adults can understand, when she grows up, she will understand. When she is young, shouldn't she enjoy an innocent childhood? The hot air balloon didn't float very far. Because the distance was limited, it floated and floated. When they reached their destination, Hua Jin carried Natalia in his arms and Gong Jie followed closely behind as they got off the hot air balloon. As Yu Yu and Yun Shishir's hot air balloon was still a while away, Gong Jie saw a gazebo not far away and suggested that they wait there for a while. The gazebo was directly opposite the dessert station, which sold milk tea and snacks. Natalia was attracted by the donuts and milk tea. Gong Jie ordered a drink for each of them and bought some snacks. Then, they sat at the gazebo and waited. After a while, Yu Yu and Yun Shishir came down. Gong Jie stood up and was about to greet her when he saw Yun Shishir walking over with a pale face. He could not help but feel a little nervous. What happened? Yun Shishir patted her chest, obviously still having lingering fears. Yu Yu explained, maybe the hot air balloon was too shaky. Mommy thought there was a malfunction and was afraid that the hot air balloon would fall. Gong Jie said, how could it fall? Accidents are hard to say. Yun Shishir was still in shock. Beside her, Yu Yu mumbled, you don't trust your son. What do you mean? When Hua Jin heard this, he could not help but laugh. He reminded her softly, your son invested in this amusement park. Yun Shishir suddenly understood. Yu Yu patted his chest and said, if anything happens to mommy, I'll take responsibility. Gong Jie said coldly, but if something happens to your mommy and you're with her, who can guarantee that you'll be fine? Yu Yu was silent for a long time. Then, he said in disdain, Uncle, must you argue with me? Gong Jie said seriously, no. Yu Yu glanced at him and saw that Natalia was sitting on a chair and eating heartily. Coincidentally, he was also a little hungry, so he walked over and saw that she was hugging a chocolate donut. The corners of her mouth were dirty, and she looked like a greedy kitten. Chapter 4104. Is it good? Yu Yu swallowed a mouthful of saliva. It wasn't that he hadn't eaten donuts before. He didn't like them, but for some reason, when he saw her eating so happily, his appetite was whetted. Hua Jin saw this and said helplessly, why do you keep staring at the food in her hands? Because she's eating so happily. If you want to eat, I'll buy it for you. Without waiting for Yu to say anything, Hua Jin stood up and walked to the small window. He bought donuts and milk tea for Yu Yu according to the taste he had bought for Natalia. Hua Jin put the donuts into Yu Yu's mouth. Yu took a bite and sighed regretfully. It tasted worse than he had imagined. It wasn't as good as he had imagined. But he saw Natalia eating so happily, especially her cherry lips. She gently took a bite of the donut and broke through the chocolate coating. The soft core was on her lips. It was so tempting. But when he tasted it, it tasted bitter. Yu Yu knew how to make donuts himself. If he were to give a rating for his desserts, he would definitely give it a 9 out of 10. But if he were to give a rating for this dessert station, he would probably give it a 4 out of 10. But when he saw Natalia eating so happily, Yu Yu couldn't help but ask, is it good? Natalia had already finished 2 chocolate donuts and was sucking on her fingers. She looked up and saw Yu Yu looking at her in surprise. She nodded and said, it's delicious. What's this called? Donuts. Donuts? Natalia tried hard to absorb this new Chinese word. She enunciated clearly, donuts, delicious. Gong Jie had already told her that this would be her place of residence in the future. Since she was going to stay here, Chinese would replace English and become her mother tongue. Although she was born here, she lived in an orphanage for a while before she was taken to the United States. Although she didn't forget her Chinese, it had deteriorated a lot. However, Natalia was extremely talented in languages. Even though she hadn't spoken Chinese for a long time, her pronunciation was still very accurate. Donuts, very delicious. Yu said proudly, I know how to make donuts too. Natalia looked at him as if she had discovered a new continent. Do you really know how to make donuts? Yes. My cooking is countless times better than this. Really? Natalia was stunned. I don't believe it. If you don't believe me, I can cook it for you. You'll know after you eat it. Yu was very pleased. Beside her, Hua Jin chimed in, Yu's desserts are indeed delicious. It's true, it's not fake at all. When Natalia heard this, she was very surprised. She looked at Gong Jie inquisitively as if she was asking for his opinion. Gong Jie nodded silently. That's right. It's true. Wow. Natalia's eyes sparkled. She immediately hugged Yu's arm and said coquettishly, I want to eat it. You can cook it for me. Okay, no problem. Yu winked at her. I'll make whatever flavor you like. I like strawberries and chocolate. There are other flavors too. What other flavors are there? For example, mousse, vanilla, coffee. The two little clowns started to talk about donuts. Chapter 4105. When it came to food, Yu spoke clearly and logically, and Natalia was also a foodie. Her appetite was whetted by Yu. In a way, these two little fellows were really a match made in heaven. One loved to eat, and the other knew how to eat. Hua Jin walked over, not wanting to interrupt them. However, they were at the amusement park, and they couldn't just sit there and talk about what flavor of donuts. Natalia, be a good girl. When Yu comes home, I'll make donuts for you. Let's go on the Ferris wheel now, okay? Natalia looked at Hua Jin, and then looked at Yu reluctantly. She wanted to say something, but she didn't. It was obvious that she was a little disappointed. When Yu saw this, he couldn't bear to see her like this, but he still promised, I promise you, I'll make you delicious donuts. When will it be? I'm not free tomorrow. How about the day after tomorrow? Natalia nodded obediently, and then she was willing to stand up. Hua Jin held Natalia's hand, and Natalia took the initiative to reach out and hold Gong Jie's hand. From afar, the backs of the three of them looked inexplicably harmonious and warm. This time, Hua Jin came to the amusement park fully prepared. He was in disguise, but along the way he still attracted the attention of many tourists. Isn't that Hua Jin? It feels like it, but why would Hua Jin appear here? That makes sense. But from his silhouette and aura? Also, look at his hat. I remember when Hua Jin appeared at the airport, he was wearing that hat. How is that possible? Did you see it with your own eyes? Of course. At that time, I personally went to the airport to pick him up. I'm Hua Jin's loyal fan. As the number of people increased, the discussions became louder and louder. Many tourists wanted to see what was going on, so they kept squeezing towards Hua Jin and looking in his direction. At this time, many people found something even more interesting. That man who looks like Hua Jin is holding a little girl's hand. This little girl is so pretty. She looks like a mixed blood. How is he similar? He's definitely a mixed blood. Oh my God. Look, she has purple eyes. Impossible. How could there be purple eyes in this world? Could it be cosmetic contact lenses? Isn't it a little too exaggerated for this young girl to wear cosmetic contact lenses? Look at that man, he's the one the little girl is holding. God, he's so handsome. He's even more handsome than Hua Jin. The point is that it's so high. I feel like he's over 9 meters tall. You look so aggressive. I'm suddenly so envious of the little girl they're holding hands with. Don't tell me both of them are gay. Most good-looking men are gay. Gradually, the discussions became louder and louder. Gong Jia also heard the discussions and glanced sideways. He saw more and more people approaching their direction. Hua Jin became more and more nervous. It would be fine if there was a distance, but in close proximity, no disguise could hide the fact that he was the superstar Hua Jin. What should he do? If they were discovered, this place would definitely turn into a pot of porridge. Why not run away? This idea suddenly flashed through Hua Jin's mind. Chapter 4106. Get lost. There was an angry shout. Gong Jie's sharp gaze swept over with displeasure. The people around him were shocked by his gaze. Gong Jie had a pair of eyebrows that were as sharp as the edge of a sword. Usually he was expressionless and appeared relatively calm. However, when he frowned, he exuded an aura of authority without being angry. He had the inexplicable aura of an emperor. Coupled with that pair of cold eyes, it was enough to freeze the crowd within a few dozen meters into ice on this sunny day. In an instant, the noisy crowd quietened down. Everyone was intimidated by Gong Jie's cold gaze. Super fierce. This man was super fierce. He looked cool and handsome, but when he lost his temper, there was a thunderous feeling. Wherever Gong Jie's gaze landed, the crowd retreated by 3 meters. Hua Jin was also stunned. It was not that he was intimidated by Gong Jie's aura, but he did not expect Gong Jie's gaze to be so powerful. It was much more powerful than 10 bodyguards. However, he finally found a resonance. If not for the restriction of his identity, he would have asked those people, right? He's really fierce, right? His eyes seemed to be able to shoot out sharp swords. Right? It was not that he was a coward. It was true. However, at this time, he was thankful that Gong Jie's gaze was too intimidating. Otherwise, he did not know how to get out of this predicament. Yu and Xianxia, who were behind him, benefited from this. With Gong Jie, the god of death, clearing the way in front, the road behind naturally became smoother. Xianxia did not have to worry about being recognized by passers-by. The 5 of them entered the Ferris wheel without any problems. It was Natalia's first time seeing the Ferris wheel. Her eyes were filled with longing and some worry. To her, the Ferris wheel and the hot air balloon were probably more exciting activities. The hot air balloon was fine. This Ferris wheel was really high. It was so high that even if she raised her head, she could not see the top. Her childhood was spent either in the welfare home or in the hospital. If it weren't for the looks of discrimination from the other children in the orphanage, or the smell of disinfectant, he wouldn't have been able to resist. Although her purple eyes were very beautiful, the other children in the orphanage all treated her as an anomaly. They all called her monster or monster. The children were still young and immature. Most of the children felt that only those with black or brown eyes were considered normal. Her purple eyes made her look like a fairy. The children were all afraid of the fairy, so they didn't want to play with her. As a result, Natalia's childhood was very lonely. It was her first time going to an amusement park, let alone a Ferris wheel. Therefore, uneasiness, excitement, nervousness, agitation, all kinds of complicated feelings mixed together. You could see the worry on her face and explained, "Don't worry, the Ferris wheel is very safe." So tall. Natalia craned her neck and stared for a long time. Hua Jin asked gently, "Do you want to play?" Natalia nodded. "Yeah, I want to play." "Then, let's go together." Natalia nodded contentedly. The car could seat a total of 4 people, so Xianxia suggested waiting for them at the rest area. She didn't really like the Ferris wheel. She had only come to the amusement park to accompany Natalia. Chapter 4107. It was Natalia's first time on the Ferris wheel. The Ferris wheel made 2 rounds. When the car reached the highest point of the first round, Natalia could not help but feel nervous. Yu was also nervous. He could not help but recall the time when they were on the Ferris wheel. They had been attacked by assassins and the Ferris wheel had been stopped at a high point. He and Xianxia had been on the brink of death. Therefore, it had left an indelible shadow on the Ferris wheel. However, perhaps because of Gong Jie's presence, Yu felt a little more at ease. For some reason, even though he usually despised Gong Jie, it was only in words. In reality, as long as Gong Jie was around, Yu would feel a great sense of security. The name Gong Jie represented a sense of security. Therefore, when Yu wanted to find an adoptive father for Natalia, the first person he thought of was Gong Jie. This was also the reason why he had considered this. Although it was dangerous, it was also the greatest security. Xianxia's idea was really good. After returning from the amusement park, Natalia and Hua Jin's relationship had improved a lot. In addition, before Hua Jin became famous, he had also done a few shows related to children. Where Are We Going, Daddy? As a substitute father, he had also spent a few episodes with a non-celebrity child. He had some experience in dealing with children and could make Natalia happy. Hua Jin and Natalia's relationship had improved a lot. Logically speaking, Gong Jie should be able to leave in peace. However, Gong Jie was a little reluctant. Therefore, the date of his departure was postponed again and again. Hua Jin repeatedly reminded him and beat around the bush, telling him to focus on his work and that he would take good care of Natalia. In order to take care of Natalia, Hua Jin turned down all the shows that he could. Anyway, Gong Jie had given him a considerable amount of alimony. He did not mind taking a break and taking care of Natalia wholeheartedly. He had even thought about it. After some time, when Natalia and he were closer, he would take her on a trip around the world. Don't be too optimistic. In the end, Gong Jie was reluctant to leave. However, even if he was reluctant to leave, there was nothing he could do. After all, the Hurricane Group's affairs could not be handled without him. Gong Jie had no choice but to leave after being urged again and again by the other party. Before he left, Gong Jie wanted to throw a family reunion for Natalia. What a coincidence! Natalia had been craving Yu Yu's desserts for a long time, so Gong Jie greeted Yu Yu and asked him to make desserts for Natalia. Naturally, the boy agreed to it at once. He even patted his chest and promised that he would make a dessert table for Natalia. Therefore, he set the alarm and decided to get up early the next morning to start work. However, something unexpected happened in the morning. The next morning, he woke up. However, the person who woke up was not Yu Yu. Gong Fan opened his eyes. He felt as if a century had passed since the last time he fell asleep. He was woken up by Yu Yu's alarm. He was still sleepy. However, Xianxia also heard the alarm and walked in to wake him up. However, she also realized that the person who woke up was not Yu Yu but Gong Fan. Xianxia's head thudded and she was stunned. Her first reaction was, "Oh my God, it was Gong Fan. He was awake." Her second reaction was, "Did Gong Fan know how to make a dessert table?" The answer was obvious. Chapter 4108. Gong Fan did not notice Xianxia's strange gaze. "Good morning, Mommy." "Good morning, you're up so early?" Xianxia smiled. Gong Fan was also a little surprised. "I was woken up by the alarm. Why did I wake up so early?" I'll go prepare breakfast for you. Get ready to get up and wash your face and brush your teeth." Xianxia hurriedly left, wondering if she should report to Gong Jie. Gong Fan saw that Xianxia left in a hurry and found it strange. He instinctively went to the bedside cabinet to search for something. After searching for a while, he suddenly found a notebook. He picked it up and flipped through a few pages. Yu Yu had the habit of keeping a diary, and so did Gong Fan. Rather than calling it a diary, it was more like a way for Yu Yu and Gong Fan to communicate. Yu Yu understood what happened to Gong Fan that day through his diary. Gong Fan also understood what happened to Yu Yu over the past few days through Yu Yu's diary. This time, Gong Fan slept for a long time. He did not know why, but when he woke up again, it was actually half a month later. He actually slept for half a month. 15 days. In the past, he had never slept for such a long time. Before he could figure out the reason, Gong Fan suddenly flipped to the latest page of the diary. "I must wake up early tomorrow to make a dessert table for Natalia. She has been thinking about it for a long time. I've decided to make her a Hello Kitty-themed dessert table. At night, I'll prepare the tools and wait for work to start the next day. But I'm a little worried. What if Gong Fan wakes up? He doesn't know anything about baking." Gong Fan was silent. Hello Kitty. Dessert table? What was that? Dessert? And who was Natalia? This name had already been mentioned in several pages. Looking at the name, it seemed to be a girl, but who was it? Gong Fan put the notebook aside and sorted out his emotions. After washing his face and brushing his teeth, he walked into the living room. Xianxia had already finished his breakfast and was looking at him expectantly. Why are you taking so long? Hurry up and finish your breakfast, we have to set off." Gong Fan narrowed his eyes. "Yu." When Xianxia heard her tone, he shuddered and hurriedly corrected himself. Fan, don't call me Fan. Gong Fan didn't like such a greeting. Xiao Yichen hurriedly explained, but that sounds so intimate. Gong Fan immediately expressed his refusal. No. Xiao Yichen was speechless. Ah, what a tsundere Fan. Yun Shishir brought out the bread and milk. Gong Fan sat at the dining table and asked curiously, Mommy, who is Natalia? She said vaguely, Yu seems to like her. He promised her that he would make her a beautiful dessert table today. Do you know how to make it? Gong Fan shook his head. How could he know how to cook? He didn't know anything. Not to mention baking. Then, Yun Shishir was in a dilemma. What should we do then? Yu had prepared everything and wanted to perform well today. Gong Fan pursed his lips. He was in a dilemma, but he didn't want to disappoint Yu. Is the dessert table very difficult? Xiao Yichen and Yun Shishir looked at each other and nodded hesitantly. A little. Gong Fan was silent again. Chapter 4109. However, they had already made a promise. No matter what, if another personality suddenly appeared, he had to complete the task at hand on behalf of the other personality. In the past, it seemed that Yu had been cleaning up his messes. That was fine. Now, he couldn't possibly back out. Along the way, Gong Fan held onto his cell phone. He wasn't playing with it. Instead, he was studying it seriously. He looked up tutorials and techniques on baking on the internet and made use of the limited time he had to study hard. Yun Shishir was quite confident in Gong Fan. Baking was actually not difficult. As long as he was careful, serious, and slightly particular about the food, he would be able to complete it very well. However, it was obvious that she had made a mistake in her estimation in some aspects. Gong Fan was very particular about everything except food. As the food party, he was very particular about it, but he didn't pay attention to how to complete a dish. When they arrived at Natalia's house, the car stopped. Gong Fan still looked confused. He couldn't figure it out. He didn't even know what butter was and what cheese was. What was a mold and what was saccharin? Should he give up? He really couldn't figure out what these formulas were made of. If he was given dozens of mathematical Olympiad questions, it would still be relatively easy. Wasn't it difficult for him to bake? However, Gong Fan could only imagine Yu's disappointed expression in the diary. It seems that I should let you sleep for a longer time. Gong Fan suddenly remembered that he seemed to have been in a deep sleep during this period. Could it be that, was it someone who had been pressing on him and not letting him wake up? Could it be that, Yu despised him for being a scammer? Didn't want him to show his face? If this baking wasn't done well, Yu might be very angry. Gong Fan held his forehead helplessly. It didn't matter who was angry, but he couldn't be angry at this little ancestor. Hence, when he walked to the kitchen, Gong Fan could only bite the bullet and put on the cartoon-style apron that Hua Jin had bought. He stood in the baking area with a gloomy expression. Oven, mold, cream, all the tools were available. These were all prepared by Yu. It was all for this day to give Natalia a surprise. All right. Surprise, surprise. There was surprise but no joy. Gong Fan told himself, don't worry about the adjustment of the formula or the heat. Just roll up your sleeves and do it based on your feelings. He did not believe that even though they were two personalities, Yu could cook so well while he could not. Come at me directly. Gong Fan simply followed his intuition and started to do it. The dessert rack is hello. Kitty was pink in color, so Yu's original idea was to have strawberry-flavored desserts. The dessert counter consisted of multi-layer cakes, cupcakes, shaped biscuits, mousse, pudding, and other small desserts. He tried the donut first. According to the recipe and tutorial, Gong Fan carefully added the softened butter with fine sugar and salt. Wait a minute. Salt? He was stunned for a moment and read the tutorial 3 times to make sure that he was not mistaken. He still felt strange. Aren't donuts supposed to be sweet? Why add salt? Forget it. Gong Fan closed his eyes and began to beat it evenly with the egg beat. His ideal was to make it slightly puffy. In the end, it was directly turned into liquid by him. Liquid failure. Chapter 4110. He originally thought that everything was difficult at the beginning, but he didn't expect that the next step would definitely be much more difficult than the beginning. Next, the tutorial said to add milk powder. Milk powder? What was milk powder? Gong Fan looked at the circle of packaging bags on the dining table. Most of them were imported ingredients. If it was in English, he could still understand it, but some were in Italian and some were in French. Moreover, even if it was in English, he didn't know what this thing was. Hence, he decided to taste it himself. It was milk powder. It should be easy to identify. He reached his finger into a packaging table and gently tasted it. Oh? What was this? It was astringent, and the powder was a little smooth. There was also an inexplicable bitter taste. It shouldn't be milk powder. Milk powder should be sweet. He tasted another generation. Flour? Gong Fan tried many kinds of powdery things and finally found milk powder. Suddenly, he felt a sense of relief. I finally found you. Fortunately, I didn't give up. He was filled with emotions in his heart, so he wanted to gently shake the milk powder into the mixing bowl. Rustle? Gong Fan was silent. Looking at about half a bowl of milk powder, he was a little confused. It seemed that there was a little too much milk powder. However, the formula didn't seem to say how much milk powder to add. This amount should be just right? If there was too much milk powder, then the subsequent ingredients should be slightly more. There shouldn't be a problem. Moreover, he liked milk powder. Gong Fan made up his mind, so he braced himself and continued to do it. He cracked 4 eggs and accidentally broke the eggshell shards into the egg. The shards were mixed into the thick egg liquid and couldn't be picked out no matter how hard he tried. He simply used chopsticks and finally picked out the fragments. He added dry yeast, flour, and butter one after another. He directly kneaded the dough into a ball and threw it into the toaster with a thud. Xianxia, who was passing by the kitchen, heard this strange sound and was a little worried, so she sneaked into the kitchen. Gong Fan was rummaging through the cupboards in search of strawberry-flavored chocolate sauce, so he didn't notice Xianxia sneaking in. The dough was a little big, and the toaster was buzzing. Soon, after 10 minutes, Gong Fan opened the toaster and took out the hot dough with gloves. At that time, the dough had already fermented and was bigger than before. However, why does it feel so hard? It clearly said that the dough would be softer than before when it was taken out of the toaster. Forget it. Gong Fan used his hand to press out the gas inside. In the end, he accidentally cracked the dough. Should I add more water? That wouldn't do. This step wasn't mentioned in the tutorial. He hadn't reached the final step yet. Perhaps this was a normal phenomenon. Yes, its existence was reasonable. Gong Fan left the fermented dough to dry for 10 minutes before he started to fiddle with the strawberry chocolate sauce. The strawberry chocolate sauce was ready-made, so all he had to do was mix it according to the right ratio. Chapter 41:11. Why did it feel like something that you did with such ease had become a stumbling block when it came to him? Baking was so difficult. Gong Fan felt that his head was about to become twice as big. He braced himself and started to roll the dough. In the end, he was so busy that he finally used the mold to cut the donuts into circles. He spread the strawberry jam evenly on the donuts and walked to the pan of oil. Xianxia did not want to disturb his great undertaking at first, but when she saw that he was about to put the donuts with strawberry jam into the pan, she wanted to stop him. Splash, crackle, oil splattered everywhere. Gong Fan calmly held the pan in his hand and expressionlessly blocked the oil that was about to splash on his face. His expression was ice cold. After about 10 seconds, he turned off the fire and approached the pan of oil. Only then did he realize that there was something charred on the surface of the oil. He did not know that applying the strawberry jam was a step that could only be done after the oil was out of the pan. If he put the strawberry jam into the pan of oil, it would He looked at the 2 black balls of donuts, and the veins on his forehead throbbed. Gong Fan carefully scooped up the 2 balls of donuts. Looking at the 2 balls of donuts, he could not help but feel a little worried. What was this? He had been busy for a long time, and these 2 donuts were actually charred. Gong Fan's eyelids twitched violently. The resentment in his heart towards the donuts gradually rose. He could not accept such a passable product. He had to start over. It was still early anyway. Gong Fan had lost count of how many donut-making trips. Xianxia watched from behind. Looking at Gong Fan's calm but flustered appearance, she could not help but want to laugh. He was calm because no matter how troublesome it was, he was still expressionless. He was flustered because he could always make the simple steps in Yu Yu's hands very complicated. Crackle! The donuts were put into the pan of oil for the third time. Behind him, Xianxia also tiptoed into the kitchen and quietly stood behind him, watching with Xianxia. When the donuts were ready, they finally had the shape that a donut should have. Of course, as for the taste, that was another matter. The desserts from Gong Fan's hands would definitely not taste good. For some reason, this was Xianxia's intuition. Gong Fan did not notice that Hua Jin had also walked in behind him. The three of them stared at him with their mouths agape as he made desserts. Tragic. How tragic. It was extremely tragic. Could it be any more tragic? Hua Jin looked at the trash can. There were several black pancakes and his heart ached. At the same time, there was some drumming. She wondered how palatable the donut that Gong Fan had made would be. Could it be food poisoning? Why don't I let little Chen test the poison first and see if it's edible? I don't want Natalia to get food poisoning after eating his donut. I have a feeling that Fan isn't making donuts, whispered little Chen as he inched closer to his mother's ear. Xianxia heard this and held back her laughter. She asked in return, if it's not donuts, then what is it? Xianxia frowned seriously. It's poison. Xianxia was speechless. Mommy, can I not eat it? Xianxia trembled. I'm scared. Chapter 41:12. Fan, is this a donut? Hua Jin asked curiously. When Gong Fan heard the voice, he turned around abruptly and saw 4 people standing behind him, looking at his creation. He grunted and said, donuts? Hua Jin, on the other hand, was wondering if this thing could be eaten. Would it look a little scary? Perhaps it would be able to cope with it after eating it. Hence, he instructed Xianxia, go and try it. What do you think of the taste? Xianxia was shocked. He didn't expect Hua Jin to push him into the fire pit. Why didn't he try it himself? He was obviously asking him to test the poison. Xianxia pouted, obviously unhappy. He asked in return, why don't you try it? Xiao Fan's desserts must be delicious. As Hua Jin spoke, he glanced at him from the corner of his eye. Do you think Fan's desserts taste bad? Gong Fan couldn't be bothered with how Hua Jin addressed him. Instead, he glared at Xianxia and snorted. Do you think it tastes bad? Xianxia gulped and shook his head vigorously. I believe in my brother's cooking. Then try it. Try. Xianxia was so shocked that he couldn't speak. What the hell? Had he really become a test subject for poison? He felt terrible. He wanted to cry. Why was his life so hard? He was always pushed out to do such things at critical moments. However, Xianxia didn't want to offend his brother. He immediately took a step forward righteously and looked like he was ready to die. Okay, I'll try it. Gong Fan was unhappy when he saw his brother's expression. He looked like he was about to jump into the fire pit. You don't seem willing. Why would I? Xianxia looked at him reproachfully. I think it should taste good. Then don't look like that. Xianxia was speechless. He let out an "oh," and had no choice but to accept his fate and pick up a donut. Looking at the burnt surface, he hardened his heart, gritted his teeth, and took a bite. A comet colliding with Earth, volcano eruption, various apocalyptic scenes flashed before his eyes. Xianxia felt as if his entire body was being scorched by lava, and tears almost flowed out of his eyes. What was that? Is this a donut? There was no sweetness at all. It was like eating a piece of charred coal. Not only was the color similar, but the taste was also exactly the same. It tasted so bad that he wanted to cry. Even taking a punch wasn't as painful as this. However, even someone like Xianxia, who had a strong tolerance, did not frown. He only snorted and said calmly, not bad. Gong Fan's eyes lit up. Really? Yes, it's true, but I don't think it's the kind of smell Natalia likes. Is it too sweet? Gong Fan muttered again. I did put a little too much milk powder and saccharin. Xianxia muttered to himself. It would be better if it was unreasonably sweet. At least there was sweetness. What was this smell? This was the smell of charcoal. It was bitter and astringent. Why were the two personalities, Gong Fan and Yu Yu, so different when they were clearly the same person. Xiao Yichen couldn't help but miss you. You don't look well. Gong Fan sized him up and became suspicious. Chapter 41:13. When Yun Shirshir heard this, she inexplicably despised her son. Xiao Yichen, you're really good at lying through your teeth. It's fine if it doesn't taste good, but you even put on an act. However, Yun Shirshir was touched. Xiao Yichen must have been afraid that Gong Fan would be disappointed and upset, so he endured the taste and pretended that it tasted good. It's delicious. Xiao Yichen gave Gong Fan an exaggerated thumbs up. When Gong Fan heard this, he was inexplicably touched. It turned out that the donuts he made were this delicious? Even Xiao Yichen was afraid that he wouldn't be able to eat the donuts he made in the future. Gong Fan pursed his lips and revealed a rare gentle smile. It's okay. In the future, if you want to eat it, I'll make it for you, okay? When Xiao Yichen heard this, he was so shocked that he almost couldn't close his mouth. He clicked his tongue and looked helplessly at Yun Shirshir. At that moment, Yun Shirshir could only look helplessly at the sky and pretend that she wasn't there. Hua Jin tried his best to cover his mouth and snigger. This was too funny. What kind of mother would trick her own son? However, this Gong Fan was so smart that he couldn't tell that Xiao Yichen was just being perfunctory. How was it delicious? Just by looking at its appearance, one could tell that it tasted terrible. Moreover, looking at Xiao Yichen's pained and embarrassed expression, it was enough to prove that this thing tasted terrible. Hua Jin shuddered in his heart. He was deeply in awe of Gong Fan's culinary skills. Gong Jie glanced at Xiao Yichen and then at Hua Jin and winked. Hua Jin carefully leaned over and discussed with him, why don't we explain the situation to Natalia and forget about the dessert table? If we really let Natalia eat this, she'll definitely be poisoned. It was rare that Gong Jie agreed with her. Yes. With that, he raised his head and said to Gong Fan, Xiao Fan, you don't have to make desserts. When Gong Fan heard this, he was puzzled. Why? Because, Gong Jie frowned and made up a lie. Natalia has a cold. She shouldn't eat anything too sweet. How about this? When Gong Fan heard this, he raised his eyebrows and complained, I've worked so hard for so long and finally made the donuts. You're telling me that she has a cold and doesn't want to eat them. Couldn't you have told me earlier? Gong Jie, the desserts you make have to be F***king edible. Is this food edible? Even puppies don't eat it? Hua Jin looked at Gong Fan, but he couldn't bear it. Especially when he saw the disappointment in his eyes, he felt an inexplicable sense of helplessness. Gong Fan had worked so hard to make it, he couldn't possibly let it go to waste. Forget it, he couldn't let his painstaking efforts go to waste. Hua Jin thought that he had sacrificed his life for the sake of righteousness and should eat a piece of the donut he made. He didn't want the little guy to work so hard for nothing and feel disappointed. Although he knew that this donut would definitely taste terrible, he knew in his heart that it would definitely taste like wax when he saw Xiao Yichen's expression. However, he had to warm the little guy's heart. Hence, Hua Jin clenched his fists and made an important decision. When Xiao Yichen saw Hua Jin walking over, he was shocked. He desperately winked at Hua Jin, telling him not to touch Hua Jin's dark cuisine. However, Hua Jin didn't see it. Until Hua Jin stuffed a piece of donut into his mouth, boom, Hua Jin was shocked. Chapter 41:14. What was this taste? This feeling. It was as if his brain had been blown up by an atomic bomb. It was crispy on the inside and tender on the outside. It's so hard. Hua Jin had just uttered these two words when Gong Fan narrowed his eyes in alarm. Does it taste bad? No. Hua Jin used a Herculean effort to swallow that lump of black stuff. His entire mouth was filled with an inexplicable sandy texture and bitterness. It felt as if he had swallowed a mouthful of black soil. To be able to make a donut taste like this was also a skill. Hua Jin quickly corrected himself. It's so delicious that it's hard to describe. Gong Fan was stunned. At the side, Gong Jie and Xiao Yichen glanced at him in disdain. Was this PUBG? He could actually make such a big turn. Gong Fan was very smart. Even if he was initially fooled by Xiao Yichen's superb acting skills, he would still be able to tell that the donut tasted really bad. Hua Jin's words could lie, but his eyes and micro-expressions couldn't. In other words, no matter how good his acting skills were, he couldn't hide the fact that the donut tasted bad. Was it really that bad? He muttered in his heart and glanced at the black donut on the plate. He didn't believe it, so he took a piece and took a bite. Dong! He almost fell to the ground. Xianxia was frightened and hurried over to support him. Gong Fan struggled to support himself on the table and waved his hand gently to indicate that he was fine. However, when he turned around, Xianxia saw that his face was gloomy and full of disappointment. It tastes so bad. He had never eaten anything so disgusting. Although he didn't want to admit it, the donut tasted really bad. He emptied the entire plate of failed products into the bin expressionlessly. Everyone was silent. They didn't know whether to laugh or console him. Gong Fan sounded a little lonely. Is Yu's food delicious? Xianxia said helplessly, he's better at cooking. Oh! With a thud, Gong Fan's head drooped as low as it could go. It was obvious that he was utterly disappointed. He had a competitive personality and was unwilling to do anything worse than others. However, in this aspect, he really couldn't compare to Yu, so he felt a little sad. At the same time, he was somewhat unwilling. Yu was so outstanding that he dared not look her in the eye. He had made this donut very seriously and had even failed several times. But why did he still fail this time? Gong Fan felt inexplicably frustrated. Xianxia rubbed his head helplessly and said, "All right, don't be sad. Actually, it's not bad that you managed to do it for the first time. It was Mommy's first time cooking, and it didn't taste as good as yours. You're like Mommy in this aspect. Mommy doesn't seem to have any talent in this area." When Gong Fan heard this, the sadness in his heart eased a little. Really? Yes, really. So you see, when has Mommy ever cooked before? It's always Yu who cooks. Mommy doesn't know how to cook or make desserts. When Gong Fan heard this, he felt upset. I'll study it more next time. Who knows, I might have a talent for making desserts too. When Xianxia heard this, he didn't know why, but he quivered. Chapter 41:15. Xianxia quickly comforted him. Actually, you don't have to. Look, if you're not good at cooking, you don't have to try it. Gong Fan was a little suspicious when he heard this. But, do you think I don't have talent in this area? However, Xianxia did not dare to say it out loud. He only said vaguely, I think you're better than Yu in many aspects. For example? Didn't you come up with the Deva project? I heard from my uncle that although the idea of the Deva project is shocking, if it succeeds, Hurricane will control the global market. When Gong Fan heard this, he did not know why, but there was a hint of loneliness in his eyes. The so-called Deva project is actually built on Yu's blueprints. Without his blueprints, even if I came up with this project, it would be a pipe dream. Xianxia was speechless. But you're very good at business. But Yu's business philosophy is not worse than mine. Xianxia was even more speechless. Gong Fan pursed his lips and said calmly, all of you get out. I'll try again. Even if I don't make it into a dessert table, I'll make it into a donut. He did not want to disappoint Yu. He did not want him to think that he was useless. No matter what, he still wanted to give it a try. When Hua Jin and Gong Jia heard this, they looked at each other. Xianxia smiled faintly and said, if he wants to make it himself, why don't we let him try again? No matter what this child does, he always wants to finish what he started. Although she knew that cooking was also a matter of talent. She did not know how to cook and Muyaja was not very good at it either. However, Yi was a natural at cooking. She could only say that he was very talented in cooking and had a keen sense of smell when it came to food. This was something that they could not achieve. Whether it was genetic mutation or Yu's unique talent, cooking depended on one's intuition. Some people, even if they had never learned how to cook, could make anything taste good. Yu could even create many dishes that could not be found in restaurants all over the world. The four of them left the kitchen quietly. Gong Fan looked at the kitchen counter silently. In the end, he took a deep breath, rolled up his sleeves, and started from scratch. At the door, Natalia secretly pushed the door open and peeked through the gap. She saw a slender figure standing in front of the kitchen counter. She looked around and saw that he was the only one in the huge kitchen, so she tiptoed in. She quietly stood behind Gong Fan and quietly watched him stir the egg. Gong Fan was so focused on what he was doing that he did not realize that there was someone standing behind him. Natalia's footsteps were very light. No matter how sharp Gong Fan was, he did not notice her appearance for a moment. Until Natalia looked at the dessert that he hadn't finished making and asked curiously, "Did the dessert table fail today?" Gong Fan was shocked. He did not realize that there was someone beside him. He turned his head abruptly and saw that it was Natalia. He was a little surprised. "Oh, you are?" Natalia opened her eyes and blinked slightly. There was some confusion in her gaze. "You forgot about me?" Gong Fan frowned and pondered for a moment. He quickly guessed her identity. Natalia. Chapter 41:16. Gong Fan took a deep look at Natalia. He was deeply attracted by her purple eyes. He had never seen purple eyes before. It was breathtakingly beautiful. Gong Fan couldn't help but fall into a daze and couldn't react for a moment. Natalia was also stunned. She immediately recognized that although the child in front of her had Yu Yu's body, he wasn't Yu Yu. She seemed to have heard that Yu Yu had dual personality. Natalia carefully observed Gong Fan's somewhat unfamiliar expression and pouted slightly. "You're him, right?" Gong Fan was stunned and didn't understand what she meant. Natalia reminded him, "What's your name?" Gong Fan?" Gong Fan was shocked. "How do you know my name?" Natalia revealed a smug expression. "I heard Auntie Alice mention you before. One is Gong Fan, the other is you." Gong Fan saw that there was nowhere to hide his identity, so he said calmly, "Yes, it's me, I see." Natalia turned around with her back facing him. She closed her eyes and decided to tell him her secret. "I'm the same as you." Gong Fan was stunned for a moment and quickly understood what she meant. "You're also..." "Yes. I have an older sister who looks exactly like me. Her name is Natalia Lisa. However, I've always been very afraid of her." "Why?" "She's very bad." Natalia furrowed her brows, her expression solemn. "It will hurt me and others. So, I'm very afraid of her. However, it's as if she lives in my body. I can't chase her away no matter how hard I try." When Gong Fan heard this, he opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but he hesitated. He actually wanted to ask, between Natalia and Natalia, who was the main personality and who was the second personality. However, he opened his mouth and hesitated. In the end, he didn't say anything. "Sometimes, I'll see her in my dreams. She'll stand there and smile coldly at me. I'll feel afraid, but I can't move. At this time, I'll wake up covered in cold sweat." Gong Fan listened seriously. He was the only one who could fit into her world, because he understood the world of dual personalities. Natalia turned around with her hands behind her back. She was wearing a dress and looked as cute as a doll. "However, sometimes I would fall asleep. Once I fall asleep, it would always be for a very long time. My consciousness is clearly very happy, but my eyes are closed. No matter how hard I try, I can't open my eyes." Gong Fan also had such a resonance. "I do that sometimes too. I'll sleep for a long time. No matter how hard I try to open my eyes, all I see is darkness." Natalia's voice suddenly turned cold. "It feels like I'm dead." Gong Fan's body stiffened. Indeed, this feeling was no different from being a walking corpse. "Do you know?" Natalia asked him. "I've had electroshock therapy before." Electroshock treatment? Gong Fan realized that the electroshock treatment she was talking about was the insane treatment plan that Xianxia had mentioned before. It used electric shocks to inflict pain on people. "I know that Romanka wants to chase Natalia Lisa out of my body, but Natalia always hides in my body. I can only bear the pain." Chapter 41:17. Gong Fan was silent for a while before he suddenly asked curiously, "Have you heard of the Land of Death?" Natalia turned around, her eyes glinting. "Are you referring to the Land of Exile?" "The Land of Exile?" "Yes. I heard the patients in the hospital mention it before. For people like us, that place is destined to be our home." Natalia paused for a moment, and her gaze deepened. What's the difference between not being needed and being exiled? Gong Fan looked at her purple eyes and his heart suddenly palpitated. For some reason, he did not dare to look into her eyes. That pair of purple eyes seemed to have an indescribable magic. It was as if he looked at them for too long, he would be bewitched. Gong Fan turned around and did not look into her eyes anymore. Natalia curled her lips and walked to his side with her hands behind her back. Her voice suddenly became slow and lazy. Are you willing to be exiled? What? Do you want to go there? Gong Fan pursed his lips and suddenly said, I won't go there. But Natalia was a little puzzled. Are you so sure? They won't give up on me. You're the second personality, right? Natalia's words woke him up. Gong Fan's eyes regained focus and he said in surprise, How do you know that I'm the second personality? I see the same aura in you as mine. Natalia let out a crisp laugh. Uneasiness, confusion, and a kind of loneliness that comes from being afraid of being abandoned. Don't you feel that you've been abandoned? Natalia said, Sometimes. Do you fall into a deep sleep for a long time? Gong Fan was shocked. Could it be Natalia was the second personality? Natalia Lisa was the first personality? Gong Fan turned around in surprise and his gaze landed on Natalia. However, she suddenly reached out a finger and gently pressed it against her lips. He watched as she raised a hand and stretched it in front of him. Her fingertips opened slightly and a pocket watch suddenly fell and gently swayed in front of him. It began to sway. Now, you don't have to think or see anything. You just have to close your eyes and listen to what you can hear. Natalia's words seemed to have some sort of magical power. Her breath smelled like orchids, and her cherry blossom-colored lips moved slightly as she spat out a few words with a languid tone. Did you hear that? Crack. The sound of the pocket watch's ticking suddenly drowned out all the noise. In that instant, all Gong Fan could hear was the sound of the needle turning. Crack, crack. Gong Fan suddenly felt his eyelids getting heavier and heavier. He tried his best to open his eyes, but his eyelids grew heavier and heavier. Gradually, he could no longer hold on. His eyelids gradually closed, and his world gradually fell into darkness. Daddy! Gong Jia and Hua Jin were sitting in the living room when they suddenly heard a kitten-like sound. Hua Jin stood up and saw Natalia leaning against the door. She said timidly, It's you again. What's wrong? Hua Jin saw that she had sneaked into the kitchen and was a little curious. Chapter 41:18. It's not like that, Natalia said hesitantly. It seems like he suddenly fainted. What? While Hua Jin and Gong Jia were still stunned, Xianxia and Xianxia did not have time to say a word. They stood up nervously and walked toward the kitchen. When they walked into the kitchen, they saw Gong Fan leaning against the wall and lying on the ground. His face was pale. Xianxia walked over uneasily, picked him up, and gently patted his face. Fan. Xianxia saw that Gong Fan was unconscious and was scared out of his wits. Should we call an ambulance? Gong Jia and Hua Jin also walked in. When they saw the unconscious Gong Fan in Xianxia's arms, their expressions changed drastically. What's going on? Natalia followed them in. Hua Jin caught a glimpse of her from the corner of his eye and immediately asked her anxiously, What's going on? Why did he suddenly faint when he was fine just now? I don't know either, Natalia said innocently. When I walked in, I found him unconscious here. What should I do? Should I call an ambulance? Hua Jin was stunned. For some reason, the Natalia in front of him gave him a very unfamiliar feeling. It was as if he had never seen her before. She was different from the timid little girl who spoke cautiously when they first met. Even though her gaze seemed worried and uneasy, it was terrifyingly dark. Hua Jin was also aware that Natalia had dissociative identity disorder. Gong Jia had entrusted Natalia to him and told him about this in advance. However, no one had ever seen Natalia's second personality. Therefore, no one knew what Natalia's second personality was like. However, Hua Jin had an intuition that was even more terrifying than a sixth sense. The person in front of him was not Natalia at all. However, his guess seemed to have no evidence. Perhaps, It was just his imagination running wild. Hua Jin's attention was still completely focused on Gong Fan. Xiao Yichen was about to take out his phone to call the ambulance when Yun Shishir noticed Gong Fan's eyelids twitching. She called out in delight, "Fan?" Gong Fan hummed softly and finally opened his eyes. Seeing that he was awake, Yun Shishir finally heaved a sigh of relief and relaxed her brows. "Are you feeling unwell?" Gong Fan was still in a daze. His vision gradually overlapped and regained focus. Only then did he see the person in front of him clearly. He called out softly, "Mommy." She sounded so weak that anyone who heard it couldn't help but feel sorry for her. Yun Shishir said worriedly, "You suddenly fainted. What happened? Are you feeling unwell?" Gong Fan looked around. When he heard Yun Shishir say that he had fainted, he was a little surprised. "Did I faint just now?" Yun Shishir said, "You gave us a fright." Gong Fan was also a little confused. He had no impression of what had happened just now. He only remembered that when he was still making desserts, he suddenly felt dizzy and fainted instantly. "I don't know what happened either." Gong Fan supported his body gently and held his forehead. "Probably I didn't sleep well last night." He didn't know how to explain it and could only make up a random reason to stop Yun Shishir from worrying. Chapter 41:19. Didn't sleep well? Even if she didn't sleep well, she wouldn't have fainted. However, no one knew what had happened to him. The doctor couldn't find anything even if they went to the hospital. Ever since Yu returned, Yun Shishir knew that Yu had been trying to get along with Yu peacefully. However, just as Alice said, with two personalities coexisting, Yu would not be able to hold on any longer. Yun Shishir didn't know what he meant by not being able to hold on. However, seeing Gong Fan suddenly faint, it was hard for her not to link the two together. "If you're tired, go back to your room and rest for a while, okay?" Gong Fan nodded gently, but he was a little reluctant. "Will I fall asleep and sleep for a few days?" Yun Shishir understood what he meant. He was worried that if he fell asleep, the next time he woke up might be a few days later. Yun Shishir's heart ached for him, so she comforted him gently. "Then, Mommy will stay with you, okay? Just lie on the bed. Mommy won't leave, okay?" Gong Fan nodded his head lightly. Yun Shishir carried Gong Fan and stood up. Gong Fan had grown taller and heavier, so it wasn't as easy to carry him as before. Xiao Yichen supported him a little. With the man in her arms, Yun Shishir turned around and said guiltily, "I'm sorry, Natalia. Today, he's not feeling well. We'll talk about the dessert counter later, but since he promised to cook for you, he'll definitely keep his promise." "But today..." Natalia was stunned and hurriedly said, "It's okay. If he's not feeling well, he can lie on the bed for a while." But Yun Shishir carried Gong Fan to the bedroom. Hua Jin said, "I'll go get 2 cups of hot water and send them to the room." Gong Jia nodded. "Go ahead." In the bedroom, Yun Shishir gently placed Gong Fan on the bed and covered him with the blanket. Just as she was about to get up to draw the curtains, Gong Fan thought that she was going to leave and nervously tugged at her clothes. When Yun Shishir saw this, she laughed involuntarily and said softly, "Mommy is going to draw the curtains. Don't leave, okay?" Only then did Gong Fan release his fingers in relief. Yun Shishir drew the curtains and immediately returned to the bedside. When she saw Gong Fan's gaze on her, she knew that he was afraid that she would accidentally fall asleep, so she secretly left. She was clear in her heart. Gong Fan's dependence on her was even greater than Yu's on her. She took off her coat and crawled under the blankets. Hugging him, she coaxed, "You don't believe Mommy's words?" "Of course. Mommy said I won't leave and will stay here with you. I feel like you don't believe me." Gong Fan bit his lips and did not say anything. Yun Shishir gently pinched the tip of his nose and said helplessly, "Mommy doesn't mean to blame you. I just feel that if you're tired, you can close your eyes and sleep peacefully. If you don't want to sleep, you can close your eyes. Mommy will accompany you." "Mommy, yes. I want to hear you sing." Gong Fan paused and immediately said, "It's okay if you don't sing. Talk to me." When Yun Shishir heard this, she asked, "What song do you want to listen to?" "Anything is fine." He didn't know why, but all of a sudden he was extremely tired. He really wanted to sleep, but he couldn't sleep well. If he listened to her voice, it would probably be better. That was what he thought. Chapter 41:20. Outside the door, Xianxia stood at the door. Through the gap, he saw Xianxia hugging Gong Fan in the bedroom. He frowned and turned around with a grave expression. Hua Jin stood behind him with 2 glasses of water in his hands. He lowered his voice and asked, "How is he? Has he fallen asleep?" Xianxia shook his head. "I can't see clearly, but Mommy is coaxing him to sleep." Then, Hua Jin looked at the 2 glasses of water in his hands. "Should I bring this in?" "Don't. We don't want to disturb little brother." "Okay." Hua Jin turned around and placed the glasses of water on the cabinet. His expression was grave. Gong Fan's sudden fainting was not a small matter. Why would something like this happen out of the blue? Has he been like this in the past? Hua Jin couldn't help but ask. Little Chen shook his head. "No, I don't." "Then," Xianxia continued, "little brother has never fainted out of the blue. Although he wasn't in good health in the past, this has never happened before." Gong Jia walked over and peeked through the gap in the door. When he saw the mother and son lying on the bed, he was relieved and gently closed the door. "Let him sleep for a while." Hua Jin knew that Gong Jia was very knowledgeable. He asked worriedly, "Is he all right?" Gong Jia glanced at him with disdain. "How would I know?" "All right, he had asked for nothing. I also feel that there is something unusual about him fainting this time." Gong Jia paused and said, "I'll ask Alice later. We can't jump to conclusions now." After Gong Jia and Xianxia walked away, Hua Jin turned around and suddenly saw a slender figure standing at the door of another room not far away. He focused his gaze and saw that it was Natalia. He saw her leaning against the door and secretly looking over. When she realized that Hua Jin was looking at her, she was obviously stunned. She did not think that she would be discovered, so she quickly closed the door. Hua Jin frowned and narrowed his eyes suspiciously. Natalia's second personality? Gong Jia held the glass of water and his expression froze for a moment. "I have never seen it before. I feel that Natalia is a little strange today. Also, didn't you say that she has a split personality? I don't think I've seen her second personality." Gong Jia became suspicious when he heard that. "Now that you mention it, I did forget that she has dual personality disorder. Gong Fan is Yu Yu's second personality, Yu Yu is the main personality, and Gong Fan is the second personality. If Natalia is the main personality, what is the name of the second personality? You're still here now. After you leave, if her second personality appears, a completely unfamiliar personality, I won't be able to handle it." Gong Jia raised his eyebrows. "Are you that reliant on me?" Hua Jin felt extremely awkward when he heard such ambiguous words. "Don't misinterpret my meaning." Gong Jia said, "Who is the one misinterpreting whose meaning?" Hua Jin was speechless again. This man always seemed to have the ability to twist the truth. Xianxia understood what Hua Jin meant. "You're worried that Natalia's second personality is not a good person? You've never seen Natalia's second personality, right?" Chapter 41:21. Hua Jin said this because he felt that Natalia was too strange today. Gong Fan had been fine in the kitchen, but after she walked in, he fainted for no reason. What was even more frightening was that he inadvertently caught a glimpse of Natalia's face as she looked at Gong Fan. There was an indescribable coldness. It made him feel a little unfamiliar. Gong Jia felt a little helpless. He had already stayed here for too long. If he delayed any longer, he was afraid that Hurricane would become a pot of porridge. Hua Jin saw the hesitation on his face and immediately said, "Actually, it's okay if you don't stay. I'll try my best to deal with it. I'll send someone to take good care of her. If there's anything unusual, just tell me directly." Hua Jin nodded. "Okay, got it." Xianxia was originally accompanying Gong Fan to sleep. She hummed softly and unknowingly, little Munchkin in her arms couldn't resist the sleepiness and fell into a deep sleep. Seeing that he had fallen asleep, she wanted to get up, but she was worried that Gong Fan would be sad and disappointed when he woke up and didn't see her by his side. Hence, she decided to sleep with him. When she woke up again, she was startled awake by the sound of someone turning around beside her. She instinctively opened her eyes and saw that little Munchkin was already awake. She was about to call out, "Gong Fan," when she saw him rubbing his eyes and opening them. His slightly dazed gaze made Xianxia realize that the person who had woken up wasn't Gong Fan, but Yu. Yu, you're awake? Xianxia patted his face gently. Yu opened his eyes and was still in a daze for a while. He was in a daze because when he fell asleep yesterday, it was at night in his own house. When he woke up, he was already in an unfamiliar room. He was very smart and realized that he had been in a deep sleep for some time. The person who had woken up previously was Gong Fan. Yu's voice was still hoarse from when he had just woken up. "I'm at Natalia's house. How many days has it been since I fell asleep? Today is the day we agreed to make a dessert table for Natalia. Have you forgotten?" However, the person who woke up this morning was Gong Fan. "It's understandable that you don't remember him." Yu smacked her head. "What time is it now?" "It's already past noon. I've already asked her for leave." "Why?" Yu paused and immediately reacted. "Oh, I forgot. Gong Fan doesn't know how to make desserts. He tried to do it for you today. Perhaps he felt that since you agreed to it, even if it was him, he couldn't go against the agreement. So, he bit the bullet and tried it," Xianxia explained. When Yu heard this, she couldn't help but feel helpless. "Why would he do that?" "Yes, I failed several times." Xianxia pondered for a moment. In the morning, Gong Fan suddenly fainted once. I thought that he didn't sleep well, so I coaxed him to sleep for a while. When Yu heard this, he nodded and felt a little warm in his heart. He also realized that when he opened his eyes just now, Xianxia was stunned for a moment, but she still recognized that he was not Gong Fan, but Yu. He felt warm in his heart. Chapter 41:22. In the past, when he stood next to Xiao Yichen, many people would mistake him for Xiao Yichen. Only Xianxia could always tell the difference between the two little guys at a glance. However, now only Xianxia could tell the difference between him and Gong Fan. Touched, Yu hugged Xianxia's shoulders and kissed her forehead gently. "Mommy, I love you." But Xianxia hugged him gently. "Are you still sleepy? Do you want to sleep for a while more?" "I'm not sleepy. I just want to hug Mommy like this." As Yu spoke, he gently snuggled his little head into her embrace. Xianxia couldn't help but chide him. "You're already so old, yet you're still so clingy to Mommy. Do you still want to get a wife in the future? A wife is as important as Mommy. But our Yu is really a Mommy's boy. In the future, you're not allowed to stick to Mommy like this. Otherwise, girls won't like Mommy's boy." Yu pouted and said, "Is it wrong for me to love Mommy? If what Mommy says and does is right, why shouldn't I listen to Mommy? When you grow up, will you still stick to Mommy like this?" Yu thought for a while and said seriously, "It depends on the situation. If Mommy becomes senile, I definitely won't listen to Mommy." Xianxia's heart ached. "When you grow up, Mommy won't become senile either." When Yu heard this, he laughed. "But Mommy is so young. When I'm 30, Mommy will only be 48 years old." Xianxia was angry and amused at the same time. She rubbed his head and said comfortingly, "Close your eyes and rest for a while." Yu grunted and obediently hugged Xianxia's waist and closed his eyes. "Mommy, I feel that it's very strange. Recently, Gong Fan always seems to sleep for a long time without waking up." When Xianxia heard this, she knew that Yu was worried about Gong Fan. She comforted her gently. "Isn't that good? At the very least, you'll have more time for Mommy to accompany you." But Yu couldn't bear it. He said sadly, "If that's the case, won't he have less time to see Mommy? He's actually lonelier than I am, and he needs company more. Subconsciously, I also want to give this body to him so that he can spend more time with Mommy, but he's been acting weird lately. He always sleeps for a long time." Xianxia couldn't help but hesitate. She also realized that Yu had discovered some minor changes in her body. He was a little afraid of these changes, and she was also scared witless. However, no matter what happened, she wanted to be by his side and would be by his side. "Don't think too much. No matter what, You can't change anything even if you let your imagination run wild. You just need to know that no matter what happens, Mommy will be by your side. When Yu heard this, he smiled and said, okay. Yu hugged Xianxia and stayed in bed for a while. He only got up when he was no longer sleepy. At that moment, Hua Jin had already reheated the food. At noon, except for the two of them, everyone else had eaten. It was only then that Xianxia realized that it was already 2 in the afternoon, but she didn't feel hungry at all. Chapter 41:23. Seeing that Xianxia was asking about Natalia, Hua Jin replied, yeah, Natalia is taking an afternoon nap. Kids don't have energy if they don't take an afternoon nap. Yu looked at Xianxia and then at Hua Jin. Seeing that the two of them had different expressions, she didn't know what they were thinking about. Hua Jin sized up Yu and carefully probed, you are, idiot, I'm Yu. Yu rolled her eyes adorably. Can't you recognize me? Hua Jin answered honestly, I really can't recognize you. Yu glanced in the direction of the bedroom, pursed his lips and said, that guy must have made a mess in the kitchen, right? Everyone could tell that the clumsy guy he was referring to was Gong Fan. When Hua Jin heard this, he immediately said, I've already tidied up the kitchen. But Natalia seems very disappointed that she didn't get to eat dessert. It's okay. Yu moved her wrists and smiled at Hua Jin. I'll get the dessert table ready right away. You don't have to force yourself. Since I've promised, I have to do it. Besides, it's okay. I'm not that clumsy guy. With that, Yu walked into the kitchen. Xianxia said to Gong Jie and Hua Jin, I'll go and help him. Hua Jin couldn't help but tease her, I feel that you might not be helping him. You might even cause trouble. When Xianxia heard this, she was instantly unhappy. Are you looking down on me? Gong Jie couldn't help but say, sis, don't go and cause trouble. Everyone knows that you'll cause more trouble than help when you enter the kitchen. Xianxia's face turned red. She was angry and embarrassed. Alright. She could only sit down on the sofa obediently. In the afternoon, when it was almost evening, Yu gently placed the last decorative flower on the cake in the kitchen. With that, the dessert counter was successfully completed. Coincidentally, Natalia had just woken up from her afternoon nap. As soon as she walked out of her room, she smelled a sweet fragrance. She couldn't help but follow the aroma to the dining room, only to find that there was a huge dessert table by the dining table. On top, there were biscuits, donuts, small cakes. They were all pink, exquisite and beautiful. Natalia's eyes widened in shock. She didn't expect the dessert table to be completed. This was probably a beautiful surprise. You're awake? A voice came from behind. Natalia turned around in confusion. She saw Yu standing behind her with his hands behind his back and a warm smile on his face. Do you like it? You did this? Yu nodded. But you, Natalia muttered to herself doubtfully for a moment and tried to sound out a name. Yu? For some reason, Yu suddenly froze. He suddenly asked, have you seen him before? The him he was referring to was Gong Fan. Natalia understood what he meant and nodded. The one in the morning wasn't you. It was him, right? Yu nodded. For some reason, his expression changed. He doesn't know how to make desserts. Chapter 41:24. Yu was still puzzled. He suddenly asked, how do you know about him? Natalia was stunned. Indeed, no one had mentioned Gong Fan to her. Even Gong Jie and Hua Jin had never mentioned Yu's double identity disorder to her. Natalia pursed her lips and immediately said, I can tell that you're like me, right? Yu narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at her deeply. However, he did not say anything in the end. Instead, he hid the suspicion in his eyes and changed the topic. He turned around and asked, do you like the dessert table I made? Natalia walked over slowly and looked at the desserts on the dessert rack. She asked happily, can I eat it now? This is a gift I made for you. It depends on whether you're willing to try it. Yu was a gentleman. His every word and action were like that of a noble son who had been educated in etiquette. Natalia said sweetly, of course. I love desserts the most. As she spoke, she carefully picked up a donut and couldn't wait to put it into her mouth. Yu looked at her quietly. There was no trace of emotion on his face. It was as if he was only concerned about whether she liked the dessert he made. Is it good? Yes. Is it as good as the one you ate at the amusement park last time? Natalia said, this must be the best dessert I've ever had in the world. There's no other dessert like it. She asked curiously, have you learned how to bake before? I read books and tried to make it myself. So good. Natalia blushed again and said, if I want to eat it again in the future, will you still be willing to make it for me? Of course. If you want to eat it, I can make it any time. Okay, then it's a deal. Natalia smiled and took a bite of the donut. She wanted to try all the desserts on the dessert rack before she stopped. Yu looked at her without a trace. His gaze fell on her face, but there was no change in his expression. After dinner, Yu and Xianxia went home. As for the Gong Jie, it was the evening schedule. After dinner, he gave a few instructions to Hua Jin and left. Before they left, Natalia was still reluctant to leave. She hugged him and refused to leave. Hua Jin stood by the side and watched. Gong Jie naturally couldn't bear to part with her, so she coaxed her gently and promised that she would come back as soon as possible. Only then did Natalia let go of her hand and let her go. Even after Gong Jie had left for a long time, Natalia was still standing by the window. Under the cold moonlight, the side of her face seemed to be covered with a layer of silver. After finishing a glass of champagne, Hua Jin finally stood up and walked to Natalia's side. All of a sudden, he reached out and gently closed the window. Natalia looked up at him in surprise. Hua Jin said slowly, it's getting cold. The wind is too strong. Don't catch a cold. Natalia couldn't hide the disappointment in her eyes. She turned around and walked back to her room dejectedly. Hua Jin looked at her back in silence. Finally, he couldn't suppress the suspicion in his heart. He took a deep breath and suddenly spoke. Who are you? His voice was very soft. Even if a needle fell to the ground, it would be able to drown out his voice. However, Natalia heard it very clearly. Her back stiffened. Chapter 41:25. Who am I? Natalia was obviously amused by his question. She turned around gracefully, her skirt fluttering in a beautiful arc. She smiled with her hands behind her back, as cute as a doll. I'm Natalia. You know my name. Hua Jin took a step closer to her and asked seriously again, who are you? Natalia was not stunned, nor did she find his question strange. Instead, she sized him up with a smile. She suddenly took a step closer to him. You're so interesting. Hua Jin pursed his lips. Now, there were only two people in front of him. There was no one else. Hua Jin voiced all the doubts in his heart. You don't seem to be Natalia. Natalia smiled but did not say anything. Oh, you're deliberately imitating her, but you can't imitate her temperament. Natalia is very elegant and polite, but she doesn't like to talk. She's afraid of strangers, but she's very careful. You, on the other hand, don't fit in with her at all. Although Hua Jin had only spent a few days with Natalia, he knew that she was too simple-minded. She was as simple as a piece of unpolished jade without any decorations. Simple and easy to understand. So much so that after spending a few days with her, Hua Jin naturally understood her habits and personality characteristics. Moreover, he was a very sensitive person. Therefore, he could easily tell that the person in front of him was not Natalia. I heard that Natalia has two personalities. Hua Jin said seriously, one is called Natalia, but the other one, no one knows until now. So, who are you? Natalia looked at him with a smile and did not answer directly. Instead, she said lightly, Natalia has two personalities. One is called Natalia. She walked softly to the window. She did not look at Hua Jin. Instead, she looked at the fog on the window and looked at the bright moon through the window. The moon was as bright as frost. Pouring into the windowsill, there was an inexplicable sense of coldness. She gently placed her hands on the window and lowered her eyes. The moonlight flowed down along her eyelashes. There was an indescribable elegance, but at the same time, indifference. Natalia doesn't like to talk. She's timid and afraid of strangers, but she draws very well. She likes to sing and listen to other people sing. She has no sense of security, so she trusts others easily and gets hurt easily. After a pause, she used her fingertips to elegantly draw on the window. Her dark red lips actually had a touch of flirtatious beauty. Like a fairy. It also looked like an elf. So, she gradually learned to protect herself and stopped trusting others easily. That's why she doesn't have any friends, but she does have friends. I'm her friend. You're her friend? Hua Jin frowned and asked suspiciously, "What's your name? Could it be Natalia's other personality?" Natalia looked back at him and narrowed her eyes slightly. Hua Jin's tone became gentle. It was not intentional, but he felt that the Natalia in front of him seemed to be a little wary and guarded. He seemed to have interpreted it wrongly and thought that she was insecure. "Don't worry, I won't hurt you." Chapter 41:26. She suddenly tiptoed. Even though she was not wearing a dance dress or shoes, the moment she tiptoed, the back of her foot straightened up and she stood up like a swan. She glanced at Hua Jin from the corner of her eye. She twirled her steps slightly and the hem of her dress fluttered like a butterfly's wings. She dances very well. I think she has a talent in this area. Even if she doesn't have a teacher to teach her, she looks very good when she dances. In the dead of the night, she likes to stand on the balcony of the hospital, facing the wind like a swan. Natalia slowly stretched out the tip of her foot and stepped lightly on the floor. It was light, but it was as if the tip of her foot was touching the surface of a river. There were no ripples. Her dance steps were light and graceful. It was so elegant that it was hard to take one's eyes off her. Hua Jin furrowed his eyebrows slightly. He probed, "So, you're Natalisa, her second personality?" Natalia turned around and looked at him deeply. Suddenly, her lips curled into a smile. There was a hint of contempt in her smile. She asked slowly, "Who told you that she has dual personality?" Hua Jin was stunned. He did not know what she meant by that. Natalia did not have dual personality. The girl in front of him, was she Natalia or Natalisa? "Oh, for you." The girl smiled. There was a hint of evil in her eyes. "I'm not Natalia, and I'm not Natalisa. I'm the emissary." Emissary? Hua Jin was even more confused. Emissary, what was that? His tone was a little heavy. "For you. I'm in charge of managing this body." The girl lowered her head and looked at her hand. She raised it gently and examined it elegantly. She smiled. "I can see them, but they can't see me. I'm the emissary created by Professor Romanka. I'm in charge of maintaining the balance between the personalities. If any of the personalities are disobedient, I have the right to chase them to the land of exile." Hua Jin's eyes revealed a hint of shock. It was not because of what she said, but because of the coldness that flashed in her eyes. It made one's blood run cold. Does the Gongjia know about this? Then, where's Alice? Did she know the truth about Natalia? What did Romanka do to this girl? What emissary? Hua Jin was a little confused. "I don't understand what you mean." He wondered if he should call Alice later and ask her what a messenger meant. The girl obviously saw through his thoughts and said, "You want to call Alice?" Hua Jin was a little wary. Did this girl have the ability to read minds? Otherwise, how could she see through his thoughts so easily? He said, "Don't let your imagination run wild. Do you know Alice?" "I know her." The girl's expression suddenly turned cold. "I'm warning you, don't ruin my plan. Do you understand? Ruin your plan?" Hua Jin was a little alarmed. "Plan? Oh? You want to know so badly?" The girl suddenly walked in front of him with her hands behind her back. Her eyes were as cold as the moonlight. "You shouldn't know so much. Otherwise, it's very dangerous." "Very dangerous? Very dangerous?" Chapter 41:27. Hua Jin didn't know why, but he seemed to have sensed too many things from her eyes. He immediately took a step back. Just as he turned around, he heard a strange cry of pain behind him. "Don't come over." Hua Jin was shocked and hurriedly turned around. He didn't know why the girl was kneeling on the ground, her hands cupping her ears. "Don't come over." Hua Jin was at a loss for what to do when he heard her hysterical screams. "What's wrong?" He immediately went forward and held her shoulders. He was so worried that he didn't know where to go. What's wrong with you? Why don't you come over? Did you see anything? She covered her ears tightly, her whole body trembling violently. Don't talk. Don't talk in my ear. Go away, go away. They're all bad people. Bad people. Hua Jin was scared out of his wits. He didn't know what happened to her body, but he was worried that something was wrong with her. He comforted her gently. I'm here, I'm here. Don't be afraid. Look at me, look at me. The girl suddenly raised her head. At the same time, almost at the same time, she raised her right hand. Immediately, a pocket watch dangled from her palm. Click. The surroundings suddenly became extremely quiet, leaving only the sound of the pocket watch's hands moving. It was clear and rhythmic. Hua Jin subconsciously looked at the pocket watch dangling in front of his eyes. Because of this pocket watch, his vision seemed to be blended together and gradually became blurry. He tried to calm his mind and look away. However, his eyes seemed to be firmly attracted by the pocket watch and there was no room for him to retreat. This pocket watch seemed to have magical powers. However, the little bit of consciousness he had left seemed to remind him. This seemed to be hypnotism. He originally thought that this kind of hypnotism seemed to only be seen in movies and novels. He didn't expect that this kind of hypnotism actually existed in reality. What's your name? The girl asked. Hua Jin said numbly, Rong Jin. What's my name? Messenger. Wrong. The girl's voice became softer and softer, like a feather. My name is Natalia. There is no emissary, nor is there a Natalia. Soon I will snap my fingers. After hearing this sound, you will forget everything you heard, everything you should have heard, and everything you shouldn't have heard. You just had a very long dream. When you wake up from the dream, everything will return to reality. What I said will no longer exist. Hua Jin's eyes gradually became hollow. In his eyes, the constantly swinging pocket watch was reflected. The girl looked at his expression and suddenly put away her pocket watch. She reached out and snapped her fingers. Patter! Hua Jin's eyelids suddenly drooped powerlessly. His entire body suddenly lost its support, and he softly fainted on the ground, unconscious. The girl squatted beside him and looked at him quietly. After waiting for a long time, she hugged his shoulders and dragged him to the sofa with great effort. She helped him onto the sofa. She took a deep breath, then suddenly stood up and walked downstairs. Downstairs, the nanny was cleaning. Auntie! She called out softly. The nanny's attention was attracted. She looked up and saw that it was her. She asked curiously, Young miss, is there anything? Chapter 41:28. How could this be? The nanny immediately put down her work and hurried upstairs. When she saw Hua Jin lying on the sofa, looking like he had fallen asleep, she couldn't help but sigh. You must be exhausted. How did you fall asleep on the sofa? The nanny nagged as she walked forward and gently pushed Hua Jin's shoulder. Young master, young master? Hua Jin didn't move at all. The nanny was suspicious and shook him a little harder. Hua Jin woke up abruptly. He opened his eyes and felt a terrible headache. His brain felt empty, and he didn't realize where he was. Natalia saw the confusion in his eyes and realized that her hypnosis had worked. She sighed in relief. Hypnosis was all about coordination. If a person was extremely resistant and repulsed before being hypnotized, especially when he was so alert just now, as if he had guessed what she was going to do, the hypnosis could easily fail. She didn't expect it to work. She took a deep breath and immediately smiled. She pretended to be careful and said, Uncle, are you tired? How did you fall asleep on the sofa? Hua Jin's gaze was a little confused. He also didn't know why he was lying on the sofa for no reason. His memory was still stuck at the time when Xianxia left. How did he end up lying here in the blink of an eye? What had happened in between that he didn't realize at all? Hua Jin was a little confused. Why am I here? You said you were tired and wanted to sit for a while. You didn't expect to fall asleep on the sofa. Natalia paused and explained, I didn't want to wake you up, but the weather is getting colder. I was worried that you would catch a cold, so I wanted to wake you up and go back to your room to sleep. Hua Jin was still a little confused when he heard this. Then why did he lose a part of his memory for no reason? What had happened between them? How could he have forgotten all about it? Maybe you're sleepy and tired. Natalia said. If you're tired, go back to your room and sleep. It's getting late. Go to bed early. As she spoke, she yawned. I feel sleepy too. I'm going back to my room to rest. Good night. Hua Jin nodded, but he was still in a daze. His head felt empty. He didn't like this feeling. It was as if he had lost his memory. At that moment, he seemed to understand why Yu had once told him that the memories of the two personalities were always blank and how painful it was. It was as if he had lost his memory. Hua Jin gently hit his head and racked his brain for a while, but he couldn't remember what had happened. So, he stood up and grabbed his coat. The nanny saw that something was wrong with his expression and asked worriedly, What's wrong? I don't feel well. Hua Jin said weakly, I'm tired. I want to rest early. But then young master, rest early. Good night. And Hua Jin walked towards the bedroom. The nanny looked at his back view hesitantly. Just now, she stood at the top of the stairs and vaguely heard the sound of something heavy falling to the ground. She wanted to go up and take a look, but she didn't. She didn't know what had happened, but she felt that. Chapter 41:29. Gong Fan had become very strange recently. He couldn't put his finger on it, but one day, the time he slept became longer and longer, and the time he was awake became less and less. It was as if he was on the verge of disappearing. Yu found it very strange. He didn't deliberately suppress him. However, the time Gong Fan woke up became more and more unpredictable. Yu didn't know what happened to make him like this. Gong Fan hasn't been online for a long time. Lying on his stomach on the bed, little Yichen rested his head on his hands and complained to Yu. So much so that no one plays games with me. Xiao Yichen had been obsessed with a game recently. It was an FPS shooting game. Yu couldn't remember the name of the game, but the background of the game seemed to be on a deserted island. There were a total of 100 players who jumped onto the island in the form of parachutes. There were all kinds of vehicles, guns, and explosives on the island. The player who survived to the end would obtain supreme glory. Gong Jie was the first to play this game. Later, Xiao Yichen followed suit and started to play with Gong Jie. In the end, Gong Jie thought that he was a scammer. Xiao Yichen's marksmanship was top-notch in real life, but in the game, he was a scammer. This game wasn't a game that could be played well simply by having good marksmanship. The most important thing was to have dynamic vision, insight, and even hearing. The opponent could be hiding in the corner, on the roof, or behind the sofa. The one who discovered the enemy first had a chance of winning. Gong Jie didn't want to play with Xiao Yichen, so he made an excuse and said that he only wanted to play with 4 people. If Xiao Yichen could gather 4 people, he would play with Xiao Yichen. Xiao Yichen coaxed and pestered Wuxia to play with Gong Fan. Gong Fan didn't play much. Gong Jie couldn't go online to play all the time because of work. Thus, when Gong Fan was around, Xiao Yichen would play with him. When Gong Fan wasn't around, he would pester Wuxia to play with him. Gong Fan was surprisingly good at this game. Most importantly, he was patient and had a steady state of mind. In a calm state, he could hunt his opponents gracefully and calmly. Xiao Yichen loved playing with him. Gong Fan's insight was extremely shocking. Once he discovered an enemy, he would also report the exact location to Xiao Yichen. Therefore, as long as Gong Jie was around, Xiao Yichen would abandon Wuxia and Gong Jie without hesitation and hug his younger brother's thigh tightly. However, Gong Fan had not been online for a while, so Xiao Yichen muttered. Not being able to play the game was a small matter, but Xiao Yichen was vaguely worried that something had happened to Gong Fan. Yu saw Xiao Yichen lying on the bed in boredom. He was staring at the screen of his phone with his mouth behind his back. On the screen was a picture of the battle results. He had just lost the game and was feeling depressed. His mentality was a little explosive. Yu was speechless. I see that you've been addicted to playing games recently. Mommy said that if you continue to be so addicted, she'll consider cutting off your internet connection. It's impossible to cut off my internet connection unless he cuts off the internet connection for the whole family. It's impossible to cut off the internet connection, but it's not impossible to confiscate your phone. Xiao Yichen glanced at him and opened his mouth, but he didn't say anything. Yu Yu saw that he obviously had something to ask and snorted. You seem to have something to say. Chapter 41:30. He lay on his stomach on the bed and propped his head up with his hands. I haven't seen Gong Fan for a long time. Is he sick? If he's sick, I'll be sick too. Then, Xiao Yichen couldn't think of any other reason. He sighed and said, I'm just a little worried. Are you really worried? Or are you bored because there's no one to play games with? Xiao Yichen looked aggrieved when he heard this. Am I that kind of person? I'm really worried, okay? You're my younger brother, and he's also my biological younger brother. Isn't it natural for an older brother to be worried about his younger brother? I thought you didn't want to see him since you were so afraid of him. Xiao Yichen smiled guiltily. Actually, it's not that bad. At first, I wasn't used to his personality. I felt that he was too cold. However, after interacting with him for a while, I felt that he was just cold on the outside. To be precise, he was just using his coldness to protect himself from getting hurt. I feel that he must be someone who lacks a sense of security. That's why he doesn't want anyone to walk into his heart so easily. Yu Yu rubbed his head and said, All right, don't let your imagination run wild. Play your game. Xiao Yichen rested his head on his chest and looked at him innocently with his big, watery eyes. Are you playing? Yu Yu glanced at him coldly. To put it bluntly, you want me to play games with you. Xiao Yichen blinked his eyes in a flattering manner. Let's play together. This game is really fun. Even Gong Fan is a little addicted to it. Daddy has been playing it whenever he's free. Game. Chicken. Chicken? Yu Yu thought that he had heard wrongly. What do you want to eat? Chicken. Yu Yu thought for a moment. He couldn't help but imagine a scene in his mind. On a patch of green grass, a large minion was eating a chicken. It sounded like a childish game. It sounds so boring. Actually, chicken dinner is just a nickname. The real name of this game is PlayerUnknown's Battleground. PUBG. It's just fun. I have an account. I'll lend it to you. Yu Yu muttered, I don't know how to play this game. If you don't know, I can teach you first. It's very simple and easy to learn. It's just that it's a little difficult to get first place. Anyway, once you start playing, don't think about getting chicken dinner. Just think about how to familiarize yourself with the controls. Without hesitation, Xiao Yichen dragged Yu Yu into his study room and pushed him in front of the computer. Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen each had a different study room. Originally, there were only 2 study rooms. One was for Mu Yaja's personal use and the other was for Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen to share. In fact, it was not a problem for the 2 of them to share a study room. Yu Yu used the study room more. Xiao Yichen did not use the study room much other than doing his homework. Later on, Xiao Yichen started playing games. Hence, he asked for a study room of his own. Coincidentally, there was an empty room on the 2nd floor. After some decorations, it became his personal study room. Compared to Yu Yu's study room, Xiao Yichen's study room was renovated later on. Hence, it was full of technological vibes. It was all intelligent systems. Intelligent curtains, intelligent doors and windows, intelligent stereo, intelligent bookshelves. Chapter 41:31. As soon as Xiao Yichen opened the door, he instructed the artificial intelligence, close the curtains. After a second of reaction, the curtains slowly closed by themselves. Turn on the lights. The lights turned on with a pop sound. Then, you saw 3 supercomputers. They were called supercomputers because these 3 computers were equipped with gaming equipment such as keyboards, mice, speakers, and earbuds. They were all the best equipment available on the market. It was said that Xiao Yichen had taken this study out of his New Year's money account. It was also said that Xiao Yichen's New Year's money account was at least a 9-figure sum. These pieces of equipment were nothing to him. Yu Yu sat down on the computer chair curiously. This computer chair had a massage function. At the same time, it was built according to ergonomic standards to prevent cervical and lumbar spine problems caused by prolonged gaming. Sitting on it, he felt that his whole body was surrounded. It was indeed very comfortable. Yu Yu frowned. Where's the display? Wait a minute. Xiao Yichen pressed a button. After a while, the display shelf slowly lowered from above his head. There were a total of 3 displays on the shelf. The one in the middle was a curved screen. For the sake of playing a game, little Yichen would use the best configuration no matter what. Xiao Yichen helped him log into the game account. Yi was confused throughout. This is the European server. It's a European server. However, there are still many players in China. Xiao Yichen explained the rules of the game to him. Do you know about mercenaries? Yes. There are 100 players participating in each game. The players' characters are mercenaries. They parachute to every corner of the island and look for weapons, vehicles, and supplies with their bare hands. They also fight in various terrains. To win, strategy and marksmanship are equally important. In each game, the safe zone will be changed randomly. The weapons and items obtained in each zone will appear randomly. If you can survive until the end, you will win. In other words, the other 99 players are losers, said the boy in a low voice. You could say that. Then why is this game called Chicken Dinner? Winner, winner, chicken dinner. Have you heard of it? Yes, I have. That's a saying from a Las Vegas casino. A long time ago, every LAS the casinos in Vegas had a rice dish that consisted of 3 pieces of chicken, potatoes, and vegetables. The standard reward for winning a bet was, so if you won once, you would have enough money to buy a chicken rice dish. If you get first place in this game, that's what you'll get. In other words, you'll get chicken dinner tonight. That's how the nickname came about. Oh. However, not every player can be so lucky to get chicken dinner. Yu asked, is Gong Fan very good at this game? Super awesome. Xiao Yichen had a look of disbelief on his face. Every time I get a chicken dinner, it's because he brought me to play. I remember that when he played games, his marksmanship was not as good as yours.